Chapter 601. He thought about the money he had left and felt that Wei Wei Bai was richer than him now. His brother was indeed an ingrate. Wasn't he afraid that his paralyzed brother would starve to death? Wei Wei Bai looked at the time. Good caregivers are very popular. I still have a few good employers to visit. Goodbye. He Dongling immediately said, yes, yes, yes. I'll give you a higher salary. I'll double your salary. He really needed a good caregiver in his current condition. Wei Wei Bai was the best choice. Wei Wei Bai nodded. Okay then, I'll come back after signing the contract. He Dongling thought, she's so aware of the law. Wei Wei Bai successfully became He Dongling's caregiver. As a divorced rich woman, Wei Wei Bai expressed that she wanted to play around and enjoy life. She didn't want to face He Dongling, an old man who was half paralyzed and twice married. She couldn't go anywhere. The assassin's side mission. So she prepared a bed for He Dongling and stuffed him into his afternoon nap. She opened her laptop and started to look at He Nanchi on Weibo. Cute little fresh meat was so eye-catching. This was her little baby who was easy to win over, easy to flirt with, and easy to increase her favorability. He Dongling held the book and pretended to read for a while. He realized that Wei Wei Bai didn't care about him at all. He actually had some doubts in his heart. Wei Wei Bai became his caregiver because she still had feelings for him. Otherwise, why would she save him and take care of him? After all, even Hu Lijing had left. She must have had unfinished feelings for him if she didn't leave. But these few days, other than the necessary care, she fulfilled her duty as a caregiver. She didn't even talk to him. She was worse than a stranger. He Dongling read the book for a long time, but he couldn't turn the page. He carefully turned his face and glanced at Wei Wei Bai. She sat in a chair, and in front of her was a small desk with a notebook. Her hand carelessly supported her chin, and a few strands of hair fell to the side of her ears. The skin on her cheeks was so tender that water could be pinched out. She didn't need any makeup to see the delicate texture of her skin. Wei Wei Bai suddenly smiled. There was a warm light in her clear eyes. It was indescribably beautiful. Scumhe's favorability, 25. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she didn't show any fluctuations. Compared to He Nanchi's 75, 25 was nothing. He Dongling found that Wei Wei Bai was really ignoring him. He finally couldn't help but put down the book. What are you reading? Wei Wei Bai's smile disappeared and she looked at him seriously. Nothing. He Dongling had a gentle smile on his face and was somewhat embarrassed. He was thick-skinned and continued, I think it's Nanchi's news. I saw a little. Wei Wei Bai nodded and revealed a happy smile. Yes, Nanchi is promising. The scandals on Weibo are starting to turn around, and his former fans are starting to come back. He Dongling never liked his younger brother to be in the entertainment industry. He could earn some money. He didn't expect that after the He family collapsed, He Nanchi was the most promising one. His expression softened. Can you show me? I haven't seen him in a long time. He didn't know what was wrong with He Nanchi. In the past, he would occasionally think of home and make a few calls. Now, he didn't even call. He wasn't worried that his half-paralyzed brother would die in the hospital at all. Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment before turning the notebook to him. He Dongling's eyes showed a hint of a smile. Indeed, Wei Wei Bai still had some feelings for him. Chapter 602. Then, he saw a new post on her Weibo on her laptop. Nancy, you're the best. You're the best. I like you the most. From your #1 fan who loves you. He Dongling, he felt that he had to rub his face to prevent his smile from collapsing. You're Nancy's fan? Wei Wei Bai said without hesitation, yes, I've liked his songs since a long time ago. He's so handsome that even the heavens can't tolerate it. He Dongling, Wei Wei Bai, and Nancy is kind, cute, and talented. When I married you, I thought that since you're Nancy's brother, you must be like him. He Dongling, so I'm a substitute? Wei Wei Bai suddenly sneered and glanced at him from the corner of her eyes. In the end, He Dongling, this look of disdain is too obvious. He Dongling felt that he had been hit. He reluctantly showed an indifferent smile. Nanchi, this child is really good. Our relationship is also very good. He often calls me when there's nothing to do, brother long, brother short. I'm the one who comforts and helps him when he encounters many setbacks. Suddenly, the phone rang. He Dongling's first reaction was to look at his phone, but then he realized that the ringtone was not right. Wei Wei Bai picked up the phone and accidentally pressed the speaker button. He Nanchi's voice rang out amidst the noise. Wei Wei, I'm going to record a show. Wei Wei Bai immediately smiled. Come on, Nancy, you can do it. He Nanchi's voice softened. I was a little nervous at first, but when I heard your voice, I felt like I could defeat the whole world. Wei Wei Bai's eyes also softened. Tell me if you have any difficulties. I'll always cheer you on Weibo. Hinanchi said with a smile, I saw it. That #1 fan is you, right? I'm very, very happy to see your message. Wei Bai, that's right, always remember that I am your #1 fan. No matter what kind of situation you are in, I will never leave you. Hinanchi was silent for a long time before he said, yes, I will return to that peak for you, and then, he hesitated for a moment before changing his words, then I'll tell everyone that you're the person I'm most grateful to. She was also his favorite person. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 80. Wei Bai's finger trembled, and her favorability rose again. Damn, she felt like she really had to belly dance with the system in this world. She immediately changed the topic. Your brother, Hinanchi immediately pricked up his ears and became alert. What's wrong with my brother? He won't come to harass you, right? Don't believe him, he's just trying to cheat you of your money. He's a man with hands and feet, he won't starve to death. If you see him, just avoid him. Don't let him stick to you. Dongling, what's the use of having a brother like you? Wei Bai glanced at Dongling, who couldn't hold back his smile. She said gently, when he woke up, his legs were paralyzed. Hinanchi was stunned. Because he was angry with his brother, he didn't pay much attention to his brother's news. After all, since young, his brother was independent and deceiving people. He was strong and didn't need a family, so it had formed a deep impression of him. So he thought that his brother could take care of himself. Hinanchi, I'll go see him when I have time. Although he's very pitiful that he's paralyzed, you don't have to pity him. He still has me. I'll take care of him. Chapter 603. He was worried that Wei Bai's heart would soften when she saw Dongling paralyzed. He would take care of his brother. She didn't need to. Dongling, is this his brother? This is his enemy. Wei Bai, it's okay. You can go to work in peace. After that, she said a few more considerate words to let Hinanchi sing in peace and not increase his favorability. After hanging up the phone, she looked at Dongling's half-smile and continued to look at her laptop expressionlessly. Dongling couldn't hold the half-smile on his face. He coughed lightly and said sarcastically, you and Nanchi have such a good relationship. Those who don't know would think that the two of you are a couple. Bai Weiwei didn't have the slightest trace of emotion, only people with filthy hearts think dirty. Dirty Dongling, Weiwei Bai snorted, little guy, if you want to fight with me, I won't kill you. Dongling suddenly said, I want to drink water. As a nurse, Weiwei Bai went to pour water. It's too hot. He disliked it. Weiwei Bai frowned, then lowered her head and blew on it seriously with a focused expression. Dongling didn't say the disdain that was about to come out of his mouth. She passed the cold water to him. Dongling didn't drink things that others blew on, but he didn't know how to reject it. It became, you can feed me. Although Weiwei Bai was impatient, she still fed him. Dongling took a sip, and his eyes couldn't help but be affectionate. It was like sparkling spring water, clear and gentle. Weiwei, he started to fire indiscriminately again. Weiwei Bai said calmly, extra service, 100 yuan. Dongling, who was as tender as water, was speechless. Weiwei Bai took out a small notebook and wrote, this is an extra service for the caregiver. Your hand is not disabled, so feeding you water is a special service. You need a tip. Dongling's eyes twitched, and the gentleness in them disappeared. Where was the Weiwei Bai that made his heart ache when he saw her? Who was this? Weiwei Bai sneered. In the past, I was young and immature. I thought that as long as I liked someone, I could do anything for him, even if I was covered in scars. She sized him up coldly. Now that you're older, you know how to be childish. So what if she likes me? Money is the most important thing. At least, she won't betray me. His tone was filled with disappointment and deep condemnation. Dongling couldn't use his usual tricks. Even under her disdainful and reproachful gaze, he actually felt a little embarrassed. Weiwei Bai put down the cup and went back to work. Dongling pursed his lips. His expression was gloomy, and he couldn't help but cross his fingers. After a long silence, he said, in the past, I let you down. Weiwei Bai froze in the middle of tidying up the table, and her back stiffened. Dongling looked at his legs. He still couldn't bear the fact that he had become a cripple. I'm a scumbag. I thought you could afford it, so I made a move on you. He looked over from the corner of his eyes. Weiwei Bai's shoulders seemed to be trembling. Dongling's heart twitched. It was only natural for him to be a scumbag. But in front of Weiwei Bai, he suddenly couldn't be so natural. Maybe it was because most of the people who were scumbags in the past were not good people. It was Bai Weiwei who really liked him, ba. Dongling said lightly, I'm sorry. Ding, he scumbag's favorability is at 30. When Wei Wei Bai heard the notification, she retracted her miserable expression and turned around indifferently. If you're really sorry, then give me more of your property. He dongling. Fast crossing system, male god, you come here at the crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu. Come download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here and read this on your phone, https://msashu. Com to make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click the Chapter 604. Wei Wei Bai was not touched at all. Her tone was even calmer than his. I heard that you still have 2 houses. He Dongling's mind was alarmed. She didn't even let go of his last bit of wealth. He immediately, very quickly said, how can you use money to express an apology? How profane of this heavy and sincere apology. Wei Wei Bai almost rolled her eyes. Don't chat with me if you don't have money. I won't forgive your apology. That's all. After saying that, she walked away in disdain and didn't even look at him. He Dongling was left alone. He Dongling wondered if he had become ugly and if his eyes were blind. Why did the tricks that had always worked so well in the past not work at all? The Wei Wei Bai he knew was not like this. When did she become so shrewd? He Dongling sighed sorrowfully. You're no longer the beautiful woman I used to know. You used to be so easy to coax. Why are you so shrewd now? He Dongling planned to do rehabilitation because his legs were paralyzed. However, rehabilitation was a very painful and long process. Under the guidance of the doctor, he slowly got up, but fell back again. Again and again. Even someone as gloomy as he Dongling couldn't take it sometimes. Wei Wei Bai watched silently and came over to help him from time to time. Sometimes, he Dongling would tease her to divert her attention. Why, do you pity me? Wei Wei Bai looked up at him. That indifferent and calm gaze didn't have a trace of sympathy. He Dongling was so thick-skinned that she felt a little embarrassed. Then Wei Wei Bai revealed a mocking smile. Do you know what it means to be pitiful? She dragged him to sit on the chair and said calmly, have you seen someone so poor that they have to sell their blood? He Dongling, Wei Wei Bai, when I was at my poorest, I didn't even have enough blood to sell. I even wanted to sell my kidney. If it weren't for the fact that I went to the bar as an escort, what you would see now would be me missing a kidney. He Dongling, although I didn't really control you, I didn't force you to this extent. Wei Wei Bai said softly, your parents forced me. He Dongling's words were stuck in his throat, and he suddenly didn't dare to say anything. Wei Wei Bai, I was even beaten up by someone with a cloth bag over my head. I couldn't afford the medical fees. I was worried that you would be sad when you saw me, so I didn't dare to go back. I could only stay in the park for a few days, hoping that the wounds wouldn't be so obvious before I went back. He Dongling's heart sank. Wei Wei Bai laughed self-deprecatingly. Humiliation, beatings, framing, no job, and no place to eat at your house. To be honest, I'm poor, but the poorest time I was when I was in your house. He Dongling moved his lips, but in the end, he couldn't say a word. Wei Wei Bai's tone was so calm that it was as if she wasn't talking about her. He Dongling, being disabled isn't scary, being poor is. You don't deserve to be pitied at all. At least you can afford to stay in a ward, hire a caregiver, and pay for rehabilitation. People like you don't know what happiness is even if you're used to being rich. He Dongling's heart was stabbed by her words again. He felt like he was bleeding this time. He lowered his eyes, and his words were a little sluggish, but they were much more sincere. Wei Wei, I'm sorry. Wei Wei Bai said, I don't forgive you. He Dongling's fingers tightened on the wheelchair. I will give you the money. Wei Wei Bai immediately said, how much? I've suffered so much. Giving me 1 million isn't much. He Dongling, it's rare for me to be so apologetic, but the feeling is gone again. Chapter 605. Sure enough, talking about money hurt feelings. Wei Wei Bai said again, how about 500,000? Don't play dead when you talk about money. He Dongling who played dead finally got angry. Money, 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 can't you see that I'm sincerely apologizing? He Dongling who had been a bad guy since he was young felt a strong sense of guilt for the first time. Why wasn't she moved? Wei Wei Bai, get lost if you don't have money. What's the use of apologizing? Why don't you go to heaven? He Dongling, I feel like I've been hurt. My heart hurts. Ding, He Douchebag's favorability is at 35. System, you attacked him until he started doubting his life, and his favorability increased? Wei Wei Bai, douchebags love to be cheap. If you beg him bitterly, he'll think he's charming. You have to make him doubt his life. You have to let him know that the people he hurt will hurt him in return. Only then will he know what it means to be responsible for his mistakes. Douchebags should beat him up, attack him, and mess with him. Let him feel a little warmth in the cold, then he'll have favorability. To put it bluntly, you're still cheap. Dongling was angry. He stood up fiercely and wanted to walk away. But his legs were weak and he fell to the ground. Bai Weiwei hurriedly bent down to support him. Her petite body supported his heavy body with great effort. She seemed to struggle a little. Dongling pressed half of his body on top of her thin body. He could hear her faint panting. He could feel that her arm was trembling with all her strength. Dongling's heart softened. I still have some stocks. I bought them for more than $1 million. I'll give you 600,000. Weiwei Bai frowned and looked at him coldly. She didn't say anything. She put him in the wheelchair and looked at the time. It's time for me to get off work. Then, she turned and walked away. Dongling was confused. Do you think the money is too little? How about 800,000? Weiwei Bai stopped in her tracks and turned around. Her eyes were full of ridicule. Do you really think that money can erase everything? Dongling, the hurt you gave me will be there for the rest of my life. I won't forgive you, no matter how much money you have. With that, she lifted her feet and left. Dongling looked at the departing figure. He wanted to stand up, but fell back down. His handsome face was a little twisted. Didn't you say that you'd forgive me if I was given 500,000? Why are you suddenly not asking for money? Why was this woman so difficult to deal with? After Weiwei Bai walked out, she immediately took a taxi to the TV station. She was now a fan of Hinanchi. This was Hinanchi's first interview after his comeback, so she had to support him. She had already bought tickets for the event on the internet. Although she couldn't flirt with Hinanchi, it was still good to have a look when she had time. At the scene of the interview, Hinanchi was wearing a black suit. His thick black short hair was fluffy, his eyes were deep and dark, and his legs were long and straight under his suit pants. He had a tall and slender figure, a natural model's frame. Wearing a black suit, coupled with his youthful feeling between an adult and a teenager. It fused into a kind of handsomeness that made people unable to take their eyes off him. The host had interviewed Hinanchi before. Hinanchi had become famous at a young age, but at that time, he didn't have such a textured temperament. Now, he had gone through hardships. But it was eye-catching. Hinanchi sat on the single-seater sofa, and the host was opposite him. The questions were all carefully selected. After Hinanchi's comeback, the management company that he signed with had already spoken to everyone. They told them not to push him too far. Moreover, Ninth Master didn't say anything. Everyone gave face to the management company and stopped. At https://www.sashu.com/ to read the full article at https://www.sashu.com to txt download at https://www.sashu.com to read on. Com. Chapter 606. Good comments on the internet, as well as some supportive posts from Hinanchi's real fans, could also appear. Those encouraging words from before, as well as the support of those fans, were not only drowned out by the internet water army. Instead, they were deleted and banned by special forces. This was also the reason why Hinanchi could not find a single fan on the internet who said good things about him. Nanchi, long time no see. I heard that you suffered some blows previously, but now you've finally recovered. The host said with a friendly smile. Hinanchi was calm and elegant. Yes, something happened at home. Now it's settled down. The host said, your fans are also worried about you. Your comeback is the best news for them. Hinanchi did not show any sarcasm at all. Instead, he answered maturely and generously, thank you to them for always supporting me. They are all my motivation for my comeback. Clearly, because of special reasons, he could not see a single supportive fan at all. The two of them had to play their part. The new song this time is really good. Although the album is not out yet, the single has already rushed to the top of the music charts this year. Your fans say that this song has the taste of love. When Hinanchi heard this question, his ears hidden under his fluffy short hair could not help but turn red. His voice was still calm. Not yet in love. More than a crush. The host did not expect that the answer was not normal, but a topical one. He immediately asked impatiently, crush? Does Nanchi have a crush on someone? Hinanchi was a little nervous. He revealed a smile to hide his tense emotions. He wanted to say no. After all, this was a show. It did not matter if he lied. Moreover, it was too early to reveal his feelings. He did not know if it would scare her. However, he could not help but want to reveal his inner thoughts. I do have a crush. Hinanchi laughed, his eyes seemed to be filled with broken stars. She is my biggest motivation for my comeback. I hope that one day, I can tell everyone that I like her. The host looked surprised. It seems that you really like her. In this kind of situation, the words that were said could not be taken back. Many celebrities had someone they liked. When they were photographed, they would never admit it even if there was evidence. Because celebrities still had to rely on their fans to make a living. For celebrities who had someone they liked, their economic benefits would be reduced by more than half. Hinanchi actually said that he had a crush on someone at such a crucial moment in his comeback. In fact, it was very disadvantageous to his star path. Hinanchi looked at the camera with a smile in his eyes. Yeah, I like her. I like her so much that I don't even know how to confess. The host wanted to ask who it was. However, Hinanchi pursed his thin lips and continued to smile politely. His words perfectly avoided the trap. She didn't want to give the veteran host any chance to talk. Compared to the past, he was much more mature. He was also much more handsome. A unique charm of a mature man began to appear on his body. In the end, the host had no choice but to give up. Everyone followed the rules and asked the preset questions. Then the program ended. The ratings for this episode would be very high. Hinanchi greeted the host politely for a while and then thanked the staff behind the scenes. The manager's assistant immediately took the snacks that they had just bought and distributed them to the staff. Hinanchi also took small bowls of snacks and handed them to the audience. He had a very kind attitude. Chapter 607. He wanted to return to the stage again. He wanted to stand at the top. He wanted his song to be recognized by everyone and get a lot of investment support. He couldn't be as cold and indifferent as before. Hinanchi passed a bowl of snacks to a girl in sunglasses in the front row. Her fingers were slender, and her palm lines were light and clean. She was so beautiful that people wanted to touch her. Hinanchi placed the small bowl in her hand. Suddenly, his fingers paused. He looked at this hand. It was a familiar feeling. Hinanchi didn't dare to look up. The program was recorded and would only be broadcasted next week. He thought that she wouldn't hear it. Even if she did, it would be next week. That was why he dared to say what he thought. But thinking that she had heard it in front of him, it was no different from a confession. Hinanchi's fair and handsome face blushed. He nervously pursed his thin lips and almost couldn't retract his hand. He was so nervous that he didn't know what to do. Nanchi. Her clear voice gently entered his ears. Hinanchi looked up. His face was red and his breathing was irregular. Wei Bai, who was wearing sunglasses, smiled and said, "You have someone you like. Who is it?" Hinanchi didn't know if he was disappointed or relieved that he had escaped a disaster. "I'll tell you next time." Wei Bai was puzzled but happy. "Then you must bring her to see me. I'll help you check. Our Nanchi is so cute, the girl you like must be the best and cutest." Hinanchi nodded frantically. "Then I'll go backstage to change first." "Don't go, I'll be back in a while." Because there weren't many people at the front desk, the seats were far away. Some were even staff, so no one could hear their whispered words. Wei Bai pursed her lips and smiled. "Okay." Hinanchi immediately turned and left. When he walked to the dressing room, he saw himself in the mirror. His face was red and the depth in his eyes was filled with unconcealable joy. There was also a sense of loss and loss. He covered his face with his hands and groaned after a long time. "Wait for me. You will soon know who I like." Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 80. The system and Wei Bai were speechless. Wei Bai cried out, "I don't think I did anything. The favorability points are rising too quickly." The system gave in. "I'll go to the mall and see if there's any underwear that can show your butt and cover your front. I'll buy you one then." Wei Bai, "Do you need to buy it? Just take a pair of pants and open a big hole in the back to show your butt." The system said, "You're the smart one." Wei Bai said, "Of course." The system and Wei Bai fell silent at the same time. "We're not really going to belly dance, are we?" Dumbass Sutong covered his face. He really wanted to chop off the seductive hand. Hinanchi calmed down backstage and returned to the front desk to look for her. Wei Bai had already left. He was in a daze and immediately called Wei Bai. "Wei, where did you go?" Wei Bai said, "I'm going to the hospital." Hinanchi's eyelashes fluttered. After a moment of silence, he said, "Are you going to see my brother?" Wei Bai said calmly, "I'll be his nurse and take care of him for a while." Hinanchi's fingers trembled and he almost dropped his phone. That was why she insisted on going to work. Only because her brother needed her to take care of him. He suddenly felt that his eyes were a little sore, and his mood began to fall. "You still like my brother? Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Address, http://www.sashu. Transmigration System, Adonis, come here. Address, http://www.sashu.com// Transmigration System, Adonis, come here. Address, http://www.sashu.com Transmigration System, Adonis, come here. Address, http://msashu.com// the below to record this reading. Transmigration System, Adonis, come here. Chapter 608. Wei Bai quickly retorted, no, it's just that we were once husband and wife. Seeing how down and out he is, it's only right to help. Hinanchi still felt uneasy. Really? Wei Bai promised, really? Hinanchi didn't believe it, but he couldn't blatantly ask her not to take care of him. Wei Bai said, we're almost there. Goodbye. The phone call ended. Hinanchi remained in the same position for a long time, the grievance in his eyes thickening. He took a deep breath, but he still couldn't suppress the sour feeling in his heart. Then he called the housekeeping center. I want to find more than 5 caregivers. His brother did need someone to take care of him. But why did it have to be Wei Bai? Who knew if their old feelings would rekindle as they took care of each other? He knew his brother best. His brother was the best at flirting with girls. He also liked to lie. He was worried that she would be deceived again. Hinanchi stuffed his phone back into his pocket, then put his fingers into his pockets habitually and lowered his head. He was like an abandoned stray dog. I've already grown up. I'm younger and better looking than my brother. I like you more. If you like mature men, I'll be mature soon. He muttered softly, so wait for me. Wei Bai looked at her phone nervously and waited for a long time. Finally, the favorability didn't increase. Bringing up his scum could indeed stop the favorability from increasing. Whether it was the guilt for his brother or the worry that Wei Bai would like his brother again, Hinanchi would feel conflicted. Once conflicted, the favorability wouldn't increase easily in the future. If they offset each other, the favorability would remain stable and wouldn't increase easily. Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. Although it was time to get off work, thinking about whether she could get more favorability points, she resigned to fate and went to the hospital to see if his scum was dead. Just as she reached the entrance of the hospital, she saw his scum being pushed out. More than 10 burly men wearing sunglasses and black suits looked like the scene of a triad boss appearing in a Hong Kong film. She was shocked. What was going on? Trash he actually mingled with the underworld? Wei Bai asked the system. The system flipped through the information. These people are all Elder Zhou's people. They're here to find trouble. Hinanchi didn't offend Master Zhou, so at most, he was implicated. Dongling went against Master Zhou directly and woke up in a vegetative state. Master Zhou felt that this kind of person needed to be educated, so he sent someone to pick him up. Was this education going to be dissected or filled with cement and sunk into the sea? Actually, she also felt that he jerk did need to be educated. But now that he was dead, was it appropriate to leave her, his ex-widow, to belly dance? Dongling sat in a wheelchair. His face was pale, but his eyes were terrifyingly dark, like a black whirlpool without any light. When he saw Master Zhou's men coming, he was actually glad that Wei Bai had left early. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worth it to implicate another person. Dongling couldn't help but rub his fingers together. This was an instinctive action for him to ease his nerves. The extended Rolls-Royce was parked under a Chinese parasol tree not far from the hospital. He looked at the car and slowly heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that he couldn't think of being kind today. Offending Master Zhou was the worst investment he had ever made in his life. Now, it was time to repay the debt of his mistake. Dongling. A familiar voice, clear and soft, but almost pierced his heart. Dongling turned to look. He saw Wei Bai walking over quickly. Because she was in a hurry, her hair was a little messy and she didn't have time to tie it up. Chapter 609. Her delicate skin had a delicate beauty under the sun. Dongling's heart suddenly lifted. The words that reached his mouth to let her go didn't come out, but he swallowed them back. Because one of the burly men had already walked over. Reminding Wei Bai had become a meaningless action, other than making Sire Zhou angrier. So he didn't say anything rationally. He allowed Wei Bai to walk to his side with a blank and vigilant expression. She passed through the burly men. She didn't turn around and run. Instead, she walked to his side. What's wrong? Dongling held the armrest of the chair with his fingers. His thin lips were pursed tightly, and a trace of gloominess flashed across his eyes. Nothing, it's just that a creditor is here. Wei Bai was stunned. They had already walked to the back door of the Rolls-Royce. Someone opened the door and pushed He Dongling in. Wei Wei Bai was also pushed in. The car was very spacious. It was obvious that it had been modified and reinforced. Even the windows were strengthened versions of bulletproof glass. An old man wearing a colorful shirt, a 3-kilogram gold necklace, black leather shoes, and a cigar in his hand appeared. He Dongling's neck was tense, and he almost couldn't lower his head. The white-haired old man had a terrifying aura. His eyes were as cold as a venomous snake as he glanced at He Dongling. "Little brat, you're lucky. I knocked you into a vegetative state, but you can still wake up." He Dongling crossed his fingers. His fingertips were a little white. He smiled. "Sire Jiao, I've offended you. I hope you can let the He family off on the account that I'm half paralyzed." Sire Jiao's fierce-looking face trembled. He laughed coldly. "Your ambition and your refined appearance make you look like a wolf in sheep's clothing. You know when to yield and when to stand tall. When a seedling like you grows up, you'll be a Sire Jiao in the future." He Dongling sat in a wheelchair, but because he was in the car, he was close to Sire Jiao. He naturally took the match beside him, lit it up, and lit Sire Jiao's cigarette. "That's because I was young and immature. Haven't you seen a rash fool before? That's exactly what happened to me. Only after I was badly battered did I realize that there are some things that I can't covet." He was neither servile nor overbearing. Even when he lowered his head, he did it elegantly and calmly. Sire Jiao thought highly of him. He took a puff of his cigar and looked coldly at He Dongling. He Dongling's smile was gentle, but his little rubbing action was still obvious. Jiao Yi narrowed his eyes viciously. "Although I cherish talents, I can't keep poisonous talents. He Dongling, you're very ambitious. Now you're a wolf cub with a broken leg. In the future, you'll be a man-eating beast." He Dongling's smile gradually disappeared. He knew. Lord Nine came back this time to take his life. Even if he was paralyzed, although he was irritable, this kind of difficulty was not enough to defeat him. But with Lord Jiao's current strength, indeed, he could easily kill him. It was all his fault for being too young and too impatient. That was why he had provoked Ninth Elder, this venomous snake. Ninth Elder took out his gun. "You're a young man that I admire very much. Let me personally send you on your way." There was no fear in He Dongling's eyes, only unwillingness. He bit his lip and clenched his fists tightly. Was it going to end like this? A mistake caused the He family to collapse and also caused him to lose his life. The price of this mistake was too great. A debt must be repaid with money, and a life for a life. Does Dongling owe a life debt? A clear question rang out in the murderous car. To read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. To read on your phone, https://msashu.com. Chapter 610. Sire Nine's fingers paused. He turned his head and saw Wei Wei Bai sitting beside the wheelchair. When Bai Wei Wei was pushed in together, both men were aware of it. But in this kind of situation, no one took women seriously. So she had been ignored. If she didn't speak. A trace of nervousness flashed across He Dongling's eyes, and his fingers even trembled. Sire Nine's cold eyes looked over and saw that Wei Wei Bai didn't have a trace of fear on her face. There was a stubborn clarity in her almond-shaped eyes, like a flower that had just bloomed, with a sense of vitality. She was so beautiful that she was full of vitality. This was a vitality that an old man in his 60s didn't have. The anger in Sire Nine's eyes faded. He said as if he was teasing a pet, "He only owes money for a piece of land, but I want him to pay it back." Wei Wei Bai frowned and looked up at him disapprovingly. "Then you're in the wrong?" This sentence was bold and presumptuous. Even if Sire Nine had a gun in his hand, Wei Wei Bai acted like an ordinary person, turning a blind eye and acting sweet. He Dongling suddenly shouted, "Wei Wei Bai, why are you causing trouble? Hurry up and apologize to Sire Nine." His heart was in his mouth. If Wei Wei Bai hadn't been noticed, according to Sire Nine's usual practice, she wouldn't have died. Just like He Nanchi. Because she didn't participate in this matter from the beginning to the end, she was only slandered, causing her to suffer a setback in her career. So she would be fine, because she was the same as He Nanchi, an innocent person. Wei Wei Bai looked at He Dongling, and a gentle look flashed across her eyes. He Dongling was stunned. That gaze, Wei Wei Bai looked at Sire Nine again. Owing a piece of land is a matter of money. A human life is more important than the sky. Dongling didn't kill anyone, so you can't kill him. Jiao Yi suddenly laughed. His laughter was hoarse and terrifying. The muscles on his face trembled. "Little girl, this is not your home. You can say whatever you want." "Wei Wei Bai, what I said is fair and just. Why can't I say it? Who needs a life to repay a debt? Why are you so unreasonable?" Lord Nine's smile froze. "Why are you so unreasonable? This sentence was so familiar, and it immediately pulled him back to those past years. There was once a girl who disagreed with him and said the same thing to him. Sire Jiu looked at Wei Wei Bai's face. They clearly looked different. But his expression and words were so naive that they were stupid. Yet, they were so similar. Lord Jiu's tone softened. Then how do you think I should deal with this matter? He Dongling owes me a lot of money for that piece of land. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows. Her eyes were bright and beautiful. No matter how many lives there are, we can still earn money. But if people are gone, then there's nothing left. Jiu Ye's eyes trembled. It was too similar. These words were filled with a sense of naivety and recklessness. His eyes were a little moist. The gun in his hand suddenly couldn't be pointed at Wei Wei Bai. Lord Nine had been through a lot. Even when facing such a similar girl. When he should be ruthless, he was still ruthless. But I just want him to pay back his life because I'm unreasonable. With that said, Lord Nine raised his gun and was about to shoot at He Dongling. But just as the muzzle of the gun moved in front of He Dongling, Wei Wei Bai was already in front of He Dongling. She was extremely nervous as she faced the muzzle of the gun. A cold light flashed across Lord Nine's eyes. Little girl, I remember that you should have divorced He Dongling. You should hate him and not save him. He had investigated the He family's matters clearly. Chapter 6:11. When He Dongling heard this, he also looked up and saw Wei Wei Bai's tense back. She stubbornly held on, her muscles were trembling in fear. But she refused to move her body. Wasn't she afraid of death? He Dongling admitted that he was afraid of death. He even let out a sigh of relief when she blocked him. But when he saw her thin body blocking him behind her, all kinds of feelings flashed through his heart, but the shock was the most obvious. Even if they were in love, they still broke up just like that. How could she say that she didn't love him, and even risk her life for him? Ding, He Slag's favorability is at 35. Wei Wei Bai's forehead was covered in sweat. She was so scared that her face was a little pale. But she still revealed a smile. There's no other way. A day as husband and wife means endless kindness. Just like debts have to be repaid, kindness also needs to be repaid. Jiu Yi, kindness. Wei Wei Bai nodded and her smile became gentle. He is the man I loved. No matter if this relationship is completely unrecognizable or full of holes, to me, when we first met, this love brought me great happiness. Isn't it a kind of kindness for a person to bring you happiness? He Dongling held his breath. His thick and cold heart wall. Her words hit him hard in the head. He didn't have time to distinguish whether it was shame or something else. Ding, He Slag's favorability is at 40. Wei Wei Bai's smile deepened. He doesn't love me, but I loved him. Even if I let it go now, I still hope that the person I loved can be happy. Jiu Ye's fierce expression softened. You're really a good child. These words were filled with distant memories. No one knew who he was talking about. Wei Wei Bai let out a sigh of relief. The next moment, Jiu Yi said coldly, it's a pity that you still have to die. If you like him so much, then let's die together. With that, he pulled the trigger. He Dongling's mind was blank. He pushed Wei Wei Bai hard with both hands, letting her dodge the bullet. He clearly cherished his life the most. He wouldn't even frown if anyone died. Wei Wei Bai was nothing to him. But before his rationality could stop him, his instincts chose to protect Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai fell to the ground, her face almost disfigured. She quickly looked at He Dongling and found that He Dongling's handsome face was pale, but there was no more bloody hole in his body. Wei Wei Bai said, Tongzi, you made the right bet. There was no bullet in the first shot. The system was very calm. What's the point of gambling? I already said that there was only one bullet in this ugly old man's gun. That bullet wasn't from the first shot. Jiu Yi laughed again. This time, his laughter had a more hearty feeling. Looks like a wolf cub like you still has a weakness. I thought you would even betray your parents at critical moments. He Dongling's muscles tensed up. He thought he was going to die. His lips trembled slightly, and he forced himself to maintain his dignity. Jiu Yi, you must be joking. I'm not that heartless. Jiu Yi put away his gun. Seeing that you still have some affection in your heart at critical moments and didn't let your wife take the bullet for you, I'll let you go this time. He Dongling didn't feel happy. The humiliation and anger in his heart grew stronger. But he hid the hatred in his eyes and revealed a grateful smile. Thank you for your mercy, Jiu Yi. Jiu Yi was expressionless. Thank your wife. No, it should be your ex. You really have no taste. You gave up a woman who took the bullet for you. He Dongling couldn't help but look at Wei Wei Bai. Chapter 6:12. He found that she had already stood up and hurriedly walked to his side to push his wheelchair. She smiled and said, "Then we won't disturb you, we'll leave first." He Dongling didn't say anything, so she used all her strength to push him out of the car. Jiu Yi suddenly said, "Little girl, you're called Wei Wei Bai, right?" Wei Wei Bai turned around and revealed a cute smile. "Yes, then what's your name?" Jiu Yi paused and was silent for a few seconds before saying, "I'm called Jiu Yi." Wei Wei Bai, what a strange name, then goodbye, Jiu Yi. Jiu Ye's wrinkled face trembled, but in the end, he didn't say anything inappropriate. When Wei Wei Bai got out of the car, he couldn't see her back anymore. Jiu Yi slowly took out a photo from his chest. The photo was yellow, and there was a cute girl with an innocent smile on it. "What's your name?" "Jiu Yi." "Why do you have such a strange name?" "Other people call me that, I'm used to it." "Then who are you looking for? I've never seen you before." "I'm your father." The tears in Jiu Ye's eyes fell on the photo, and he quickly wiped them with his sleeve. "Darling, Daddy saw a girl who looks like you today, you're both as innocent and as reckless." He wiped the corners of his eyes again. "I miss you." After Wei Wei Bai got out of the car, her legs were about to turn to jelly, the triads were so scary. She hurriedly pushed He Dongling as if she was running for her life, taking large strides forward with all her might. When He Dongling confronted Jiu Yi just now, Wei Wei Bai was already desperately looking at Jiu Ye's information that the system gave her. Then, in those short few minutes, she finished reading Jiu Ye's magnificent life. Then, she found the person that Jiu Yi cared about the most, his daughter, a cute and silly little princess. She immediately imitated it, and it worked. She cried to the system, "Can't I complain to the main system that I'm poor and see if there's a system poverty guarantee? See if I can save some money to repair the rejection button of the side mission." If this continued, she wouldn't die on the main mission. Sooner or later, he would be killed by the side quests. The system said, "The poverty subsistence allowance is the destruction of the poor system. Poverty should not exist in this world. This is the main system's concept." By Wei Wei, this main system is too deranged, BA. So what if he was poor? Did he eat your life points? The system said, "Don't worry, you can do it. Just watch Silly White Sweet act and you'll be out of trouble." When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she didn't even have the mood to show off. She sighed and said, "It's the easiest role to play. There's no sense of achievement at all." His motherly yet seductive sister-in-law, his energetic and energetic ex-wife, his silly and sweet little princess who spoke without thinking. The host actually didn't differentiate between the two. The system expressed that the acting skills of a movie queen were indeed frightening. He Dongling suddenly said, "Wei Wei." Bai Wei Wei stopped in her tracks and looked at him in confusion. He Dongling clenched and loosened his fingers. His face was completely pale, and his eyes were filled with a sharp sense of ruthlessness. "Why did you say that? Why did you take the bullet for me? Don't you know you'll die?" Wei Wei Bai was silent. Her spirited eyebrows suddenly drooped. She was unspeakably pitiful. He Dongling didn't let her go. His heart was in a mess, and he couldn't even sort out his own emotions. His back was covered in cold sweat. If he had taken a wrong step, he would have died. But in the face of death, he was still able to maintain his rationality despite being frightened and nervous. But her appearance completely messed him up. Chapter 613. He Dongling's tone became fierce. "Haven't you seen my true colors? I'm just playing with you. Do you still love me?" When he questioned this sentence, he was actually indescribably nervous. Wei Wei Bai's lips moved, but she didn't make a sound. He Dongling frowned, his eyes filled with deep and chaotic irritation. He turned around and was about to continue questioning. But he saw that Wei Wei Bai's face was full of tears. She bit her lips and didn't cry out loud. Tears flowed out drop by drop, the tip of her nose was red, crying pitifully and cutely. He Dongling's words were stuck in his throat, and he couldn't say a single word. The tears of surviving a disaster were filled with relief, but not happiness. He Dongling realized that he had gone overboard. She risked her life to save him. But he cared about himself and was busy questioning her. He Dongling admitted that he was a scumbag, but to be honest, this was the first time he was such a scumbag to a weak woman from beginning to end. He gritted his teeth and said something that he would never say normally. "I will become stronger. Master Joe will definitely not be able to do anything to me, let alone touch you, so don't cry." He wanted to save face, and his thoughts were deep. Such bold words. If he didn't succeed, it would be very difficult to say it out loud. But when he saw her tears of fear, he couldn't care less. Ding, he Slag's favorability is at 50. Wei Wei Bai sobbed and said, "Then when will you become stronger?" He Dongling's expression froze. "It should be soon. Wei Wei Bai, that means it won't be long. 10 years will be very soon." He Dongling, Wei Wei Bai, That's why I risked my life to save you, and came back after work to serve you. There's no problem with the extra fee, right? He dangling. Wei Bai had already retracted her tears and was seriously checking the numbers. Look, it costs at least 10,000 to block a bullet. I won't ask for much overtime, just 500 yuan. As for the mental damage, just a few thousand will do. Also, when you pushed me just now, I fell and was in so much pain. Just a few thousand will do. He dangling supported his forehead with his hand. His head hurt. Who am I? Where am I? Where did my beautiful ex-wife who only wanted true love and didn't want money go? How I missed the idiot from before. She only remembered to ask for money when he was poor. Why didn't she sympathize with a paralyzed old man like him? It wasn't easy for him to earn money. After he dangling returned to the hospital and transferred the money to Wei Bai, he was suddenly enlightened. His legs had to be rehabilitated, and he had to continue earning money. They had to fight for their rights at all costs. The experience of death did not scare him out of his wits. Instead, it aroused the ruthless and savage desire in his heart. Only those who were above others could control their own lives. He would not allow anyone to point a gun at his head a second time. He fell to the ground again. He dangling was sweating profusely. Wei Bai came over to help him. He dangling watched as she struggled to help him to a chair. Then, she took out a clean towel, wiped his sweat, and poured him a glass of water. He dangling did not resist at all. Instead, he obediently allowed her to do as she pleased. Sometimes, when he looked at her, there would be a hint of undetectable gentleness in his eyes. It was a flash of light. It was not much, but it was very precious. No caregiver was so considerate. There wouldn't be any caregiver who would work overtime after work either. And no caregiver would dare to take a bullet for him. So, she still liked him. Is it https://www.sashu.com//. Chapter 614. He dangling smiled proudly and took a sip of water. Ding, he douchebag's favorability is at 55. Wei Bai was surprised. How did the favorability increase? She didn't seem to have done anything. The system said, it's good that it increased, who cares how it increased? Wei Bai felt that the system was right. As long as it wasn't dancing, it was fine to do anything. He dangling finished showering and was pushed out of the bathroom by the male nurse. Wei Bai's job as a caregiver was to take care of the daily life. She didn't do it, but specially hired a male caregiver from the hospital to do it. He dangling remembered that when they were husband and wife, he was never willing to touch her. So it was natural that she would be shy. He couldn't bear to force her on this. Wei Bai had just liked Hinanchi's Weibo when she turned around and saw Hinanchi coming out. She gave him the medicine and water. After he dangling took the medicine, he looked up and stared at her seriously. His eyes were heavy, with a dark light, and a trace of undetectable tenderness. He said in a low voice, Wei Bai was still thinking about Hinanchi's award on Weibo, so she nodded casually. He dangling hesitated. Today is the Mid-Autumn Festival. Wei Bai's eyes drifted to the notebook. Oh, the Mid-Autumn Festival? No wonder there was a lottery on Weibo, and the prize for the 10th place was Doraemon's 2-meter doll. She wanted it. He dangling saw that she was being perfunctory, and his face turned ugly. The words that were about to come out of his mouth also stopped. He was a douchebag, but he cared about his reputation. Wei Bai, is there anything else? If there's nothing else, then I'll go online and repost on Weibo. He dangling suddenly said unhappily, Nanchi's Weibo? Wei Bai nodded. The prize is very good. I'll try to draw a prize. After that, Wei Bai opened Weibo and logged in. He dangling's mouth twitched. He couldn't help but take out his phone and open his cheap brother's Weibo. It was obvious that the comments on Weibo were being controlled. All the negative comments had been deleted, leaving behind a bunch of diehard fans and a few moderators who were praising Hinanchi's beauty. He dangling glanced at the prize. It was dazzling. He couldn't help but ask, which prize do you want? Wei Bai answered casually, Doraemon. He dangling, how childish. He coughed lightly. I'll buy it for you. Wei Bai didn't even turn her head back. If you buy it, it won't be as exciting as the lucky draw. He dangling who was rejected, he was silent for a few seconds and decided not to lose face. He continued to invite her. You did a good job as a caregiver. I'll give you a prize. Wei Bai turned around. What prize? He dangling. Push me out. Wei Bai didn't think much of it and pushed him out. He dangling smiled. He was indescribably satisfied and happy. Wei Bai pushed he dangling into the jewelry store. Then he took out a ring box. Wei Bai glanced at it and thought that he was going to do something. For example, propose or something. She could also reject him in passing. But he dangling put the ring box in his pocket and had no intention of giving it to her. Wei Wei Bai didn't think much of it and followed He Dongling to the gift shop. He Dongling bought her a 2-meter blue fatty. Do you like this gift? Wei Wei Bai looked at the blue fatty and suddenly lost interest in the lottery. Because this 2-meter doll was the prize she was going to draw. Chapter 6:15. She carried the 2-meter tall fatty blue back. He Dongling controlled the smart wheelchair and followed behind slowly. When they arrived at the hospital, they saw the entrance of the hospital from afar. There was a conspicuous figure standing there. He was tall and thin. He was wearing a black silk coat with loose sleeves and a soft hood on his head. He was carrying the 2-meter tall fatty blue. A black mask covered his face, revealing only a pair of beautiful eyes and some fair skin. It was Hinanchi. Wei Wei Bai was about to greet him. Hinanchi had already reacted. When he was waiting in boredom, his eyebrows were drooping. When he saw Wei Wei Bai, his eyes lit up. Even his eyes were shining. Then Hinanchi saw that she was holding a doraemon in her hands. It was exactly the same as the one in his hands. Then he finally saw his brother appear behind Wei Wei Bai. Hinanchi's eyes dimmed. Could it be that Wei Wei Bai still liked his brother? He hesitated for a moment, but still walked over. He walked faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, he walked in front of Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei, happy Mid-Autumn Festival. Today is a day to reunite with family. I immediately thought of being with you. Wei Wei Bai revealed a big smile. I bought some fruits and snacks. Let's admire the moon on the rooftop later. Hinanchi's dim eyes were instantly dyed with light. He nodded. Okay. He Dongling, who was ignored behind, was speechless. Wasn't he Hinanchi's brother? Wasn't he Wei Wei Bai's ex-husband? In terms of family, these two people's family should be him. He Dongling deliberately cleared his throat. In the end, the two young people who were carrying the fatty blue were chatting enthusiastically. They completely forgot about the old man sitting in the wheelchair behind them. The old man deliberately coughed again. No one heard it. He coughed repeatedly. Wei Wei Bai turned around. What's wrong with you? Do you need some water? He Dongling immediately nodded. 1 cup for 100 will do. There was a water feeding service for 100 yuan worth of water. Back in the ward, Hinanchi put the blue fatty where Wei Wei Bai was sitting. Then, without batting an eyelid, he kicked the blue fatty that his brother had given him aside. He Dongling saw it with his sharp eyes and his eyebrows twitched. Wei Wei Bai brought some water and was about to bend down to feed him. Hinanchi rushed over and took the cup from Wei Wei Bai's hands. I'll do it. Brother, I'll take care of you. He Dongling's eyebrows were not only twitching, but the corners of his mouth were also trembling. I thought you had forgotten that I was your brother. You only remembered to see me when your brother was paralyzed. Hinanchi pursed his lips and lowered his eyes. Brother, I'm sorry. I'm too busy. Such a big thing happened at home. I need to carry this family like a man. He Dongling's eyebrows relaxed. That was true. His family was in such a mess. This youngest brother of his had not suffered much since he was young. Even when he grew up, he was well behaved, like a good child who did not dare to do anything bad. He thought that Hinanchi would not be able to recover from the setback when his family was in such a state. Unexpectedly, the result was somewhat similar to him. He could actually start afresh, show his ambition and talent, and climb up little by little. He Dongling was about to forgive him. But then he heard him say, the burden of the family is heavy. You can't do it, and you can't earn much money. You're old and your major is not outstanding. I thought that you could go out and set up a street stall when you woke up and go to the construction site to carry some bricks to support the family, but you're paralyzed. I can only bear the heavy burden of a family and raise a pair of pitiful old parents, a poor brother who is paralyzed and useless. Poor useless brother. Download the mobile article at https://msashu.com. Chapter 6:16. He Dongling felt that his entire face was twitching. He moved his lips. This is disdain. This was a blatant display of disdain. He could only go out to carry bricks and set up a stall. He even had a paralyzed older brother who was useless. Who is this? Is he so pitiful in other people's eyes? Wei Wei Bai's voice was full of pity. Nanchi, you've worked hard. Hinanchi's hair drooped. He lowered his eyelashes and said obediently, it's not hard. To support my sister, I have to support a half-paralyzed older brother who is useless. He's definitely not suitable to get married again. I'll work hard to earn a lot of money. Wei Wei Bai's expression softened. You don't mind that your brother is paralyzed? Hinanchi said, although he's useless and disabled, he's still my brother. He Dongling, who had no sense of presence at the side, had a curse word that he didn't know if he should say. Hinanchi suddenly smiled gently at his brother. Brother, drink some water. Otherwise, Wei Wei will be worried again. He Dongling's eyes were about to shoot cold arrows. He snorted and drank the water. After drinking the water, Hinanchi put down the cup and spread his hands. Pay up, 100 yuan. He Dongling, Hinanchi said, I heard Wei Wei say that this is an extra service and you have to pay for it. You don't even have 100 yuan? You can owe it first. He Dongling, he felt that he wasn't half paralyzed, but had a heart attack. He was going to die from anger. Wei Wei Bai was afraid that Hinanchi would anger He Dongling to death. She had to mediate. It's the Mid-Autumn Festival. It's a good time for you brothers to get together. Let's go and admire the moon. Hinanchi said gently to his brother, Brother, are you tired? Your legs are inconvenient and your body is weak. You should rest early. He Dongling also smiled, even more gently than him. You're really considerate of me, but I'm in good health. I just have 2 useless legs. Anyway, I have a lot of money and I'm a noble person. I don't need to walk at all, so it doesn't matter. You're the one who needs to take care of your body. I've heard that there are a lot of actors who suddenly die on the stage. Hinanchi, who are you calling a small-time actress? The 2 brothers chuckled as they looked at each other. Then, they turned their faces away at the same time, revealing expressions of disdain. Wei Wei Bai completely ignored them. As long as one of the favorability didn't increase or decrease, the other didn't. She was as calm as the wind. When they were admiring the full moon, the 3 of them occupied the rooftop of the hospital. A picnic cloth was laid out with snacks, fruits, and a box of mooncakes. The moon was big and round, making the 3 people's faces pale. Bai Weiwei sent Hinanchi to run errands to get the lights, otherwise the moonlight effect would be too horrifying. Hinanchi left in a hurry and came back in a hurry. He was so fast that he didn't give Hidongling any time to interact with Wei Wei Bai. Hidongling wanted to say to Wei Wei Bai, but he swallowed the happy Mid-Autumn Festival that he was about to say. Hinanchi passed the cut fruit to Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei, this is delicious. Eat some. Wei Wei Bai looked at the moon and took it. You eat too? Hinanchi smiled, his eyes full of happiness. Hidongling pursed his lips and didn't say a word. He couldn't ask for food himself, right? That would be too degrading. Hinanchi gave Bai Weiwei a paper towel, as well as the delicious snacks he ate. He gave more than half of them to Bai Weiwei. Hidongling watched from the side, but he didn't get a share. Hinanchi suddenly thought of his cheap brother and handed him a mooncake. Eat some, brother. Below to record this reading record. Chapter 617. Hidongling finally relaxed. He finally remembered his brother. He stuffed all the delicious food to his sister-in-law. If it wasn't for the fact that he thought it was impossible, he would have thought that Hinanchi, this blockhead, had been enlightened and liked Wei Wei Bai. Hinanchi was still a good child after all. It was probably because he knew about the terrible things he had done and Wei Wei Bai's pitiful past. That was why he was acting like this. Hidongling picked up the mooncake and was about to eat it when he realized that something was wrong. He took it out of his mouth again. At first glance, it was the 5-kernel mooncake. He hated the filling the most. Wei Wei Bai looked at the moon and realized that the moon in this world was not much bigger than the moon in her reality. So she yawned and wanted to go back to sleep. However, Hinanchi suddenly came over. Sleepy? I'll lend you my shoulder. We'll go down later. Wei Wei Bai nodded. After all, there were still a lot of snacks and fruits. It wouldn't be a waste to let Hinanchi eat them. She gently tilted her head and rested it on Hinanchi's shoulder. The strong shoulder looked very thin, but it was very thick as a pillow. Hinanchi was aware that her head, with a slight force, rested on his shoulder. Long strands of hair fell over his shoulder. The fragrance of the hair was more intoxicating than the moonlight. Hinanchi was so nervous that his ears turned red. His hand holding the fruit couldn't stop trembling. He was worried that Wei Wei Bai would see that something was wrong, so he didn't dare to not move. Wei Wei Bai's breathing slowed down. Light and average. Hinanchi reluctantly glanced sideways at her and saw her small and straight nose, as well as her bright red and beautiful lips under the moonlight. It was like a stunning beauty. In Hinanchi's beautiful pupils, only her face was reflected in them. He couldn't help but smile. How nice. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 85. The system silently glanced at the shop. Was the underwear that showed her but still there? Let's take advantage of the discount and buy 2. Hidongling, who was sitting in a wheelchair, looked up and saw their figures leaning against each other. One was petite while the other was tall and slender. Under the moonlight, they were a perfect match. Hidongling's eyelids twitched as a trace of doubt flashed through his dark eyes. He pursed his lips and glanced at them again. In this atmosphere, there was always a sour smell in the air. Hidongling looked at them as he took a big bite of the mooncake. Disgusting, disgusting. Hinanchi felt that the temperature was a little cold. Just as he was about to reach out to carry Weiwei by and go downstairs, he heard a cold voice. Suddenly, a cold voice came from behind. Nanchi, Weiwei is a good girl. Hinanchi's fingers froze. He lowered his eyes, knowing that his brother was testing him. But in the end, his expression softened and he replied, yes, she's very good. In the midst of adversity, deep in the swamp, in a place that was even darker than where he was standing, there was light, pulling him out of hell. In this world, there was no better girl than her. Dongling heard him reply without hesitation and his heart tightened. Then he said, I want to marry her again. Hinanchi, Dongling said, so she's still your sister-in-law? Hinanchi suddenly asked, did she agree? Dongling was stumped for a moment before he said, almost. Hinanchi let out a sigh of relief, but she didn't agree. I know, brother. There was no intense emotion, nor was there a rush to show anything. Hinanchi said this very calmly. Dongling's test hit cotton, soft and uncomfortable. Hinanchi carefully reached out and carried Weiwei by. Chapter 6:18. Weiwei Bai was tired, so she slept soundly. She leaned softly in Hinanchi's arms, defenseless. Hinanchi said, brother, I'll take Weiwei down first. It's cold here. I'm afraid she'll catch a cold. Dongling nodded. Go ahead. Hinanchi nodded and strode away. Dongling was left in the same spot for a while. Wait, no one was pushing him down the stairs. How was he going to go down? Back in the ward. Hinanchi put Bai Weiwei in the place where relatives were accompanying the bed. The two blue fatties were placed quietly in the corner. Hinanchi looked at the one given by his brother and wanted to stuff it into the rubbish bin. But the rubbish bin was not big enough to stuff it in. He specially organized a lucky draw. She had once said that she liked cartoons. Especially Doraemon. Therefore, he specially picked out a blue fatty with a cute smile for her. But he was afraid that it would be too obvious, so he put it on Weibo's lucky draw. The blue fat tie was not expensive, but as the first prize, it was too special. Plus, the first prize was not easy to draw, so he specially asked his assistant to buy an Apple laptop as the first prize. The first 9 prizes were very expensive, only the 10th prize was not eye-catching and expensive. What was expensive was only his feelings. But she did not draw, so he had to carry the blue fat tie to find her. Hinanchi covered Weiwei Bai with a blanket. When she was asleep, she was so quiet. Her weak and pure appearance was like the water he was holding, soft and unrestrained. But clear and attractive. Hinanchi was a little nervous. His breathing quickened and his face was a little red. She suddenly whispered something softly. He hurriedly tried to listen, but it was just a meaningless sleep talk. She suddenly turned around and brushed her lips past his ear. Her warm breath tickled his ear, tickling his heart. Hinanchi's brain could not work, and his body was as tense as a rock. With great difficulty, he finally regained his breath. Hinanchi's eyes were burning, but he was suppressing it. When he saw her fingers poking out from under the blanket, he couldn't help but hold them, wanting to put them back so that she wouldn't catch a cold. After holding her hand, he couldn't help but pinch her soft, boneless fingers. After he was done, he couldn't help but measure the ring finger with his finger. This is where the ring is. Hinanchi measured her. After knowing her approximate size, he couldn't help but say, you're a little thin. I'll fatten you up in the future. He looked up and saw that she was still sleeping soundly. Hinanchi pursed his lips. In the end, he couldn't resist the desire in his heart. He bent down and slowly lowered his head, sucking on her lips. Her lips were soft and plump, just like a flower full of honey. It made him want more. After a deep kiss, Hinanchi raised his head with a red face and neck, but felt a chill on his back. He turned around. The door was open. Dongling didn't know how long he had been sitting at the door. The two men looked at each other, and the atmosphere was suffocating. After a while, Dongling took out a cigarette and put it in his mouth. After lighting it casually, he looked through the smoke. He smiled coldly. Yo, Nanchi has really grown up. You even have a sister-in-law. Hinanchi was silent for a while before correcting him. Ex-sister-in-law? Dongling almost broke the cigarette in his hand. Ex-sister-in-law is also your sister-in-law. You haven't even grown hair yet. How can you let your brother down? Hinanchi immediately replied in a low voice, you let her down first. Dongling was speechless. I let her down, so you're going to let me down. Is this the same thing? Chapter 6:19. Dongling finally thought of a rebuttal. In the end, Hinanchi said faintly, I want to marry her. Husband and wife are one. If I let you down, then she let you down. You let her down, so we're even. The system that was eating supper when it was hungry, this bandit logic, full marks. Dongling kept shaking the cigarette in his hand, the smoke forming an S shape. He took a few deep breaths before waving his hand to signal Hinanchi to come out. After all, this was a matter between men. So the two brothers had a tacit understanding not to disturb Wei Wei Bai's sleep. When they reached the corridor, Dongling signaled Hinanchi to lower his head. Hinanchi calmly obeyed and punched him in the face. Hinanchi took a few steps back. This punch made his gums bleed. He spat out a mouthful of blood and wiped his mouth with his sleeve expressionlessly. Dongling hit him and the back of his hand was numb. So you're not going to give up? Hinanchi tilted his head. His complexion was fair and clear. His delicate features usually looked a little too feminine. But he suddenly revealed a cold smile. The sharpness and viciousness in his eyes made the soft parts of his face disappear, leaving only unyielding coldness. Brother, you don't want her, but I want her. Dongling took a puff of his cigarette irritably. I'm going back on my word. She's very good. He had played with countless women. But who could be like Wei Wei Bai? For him, she endured so many hardships and wasn't afraid. When the He family collapsed, she didn't run. When he was paralyzed, although her face was cold, she still stayed by his side. Dongling wasn't stupid. In fact, he was a cold and calculating businessman. He never knew that he had made the most successful business deal. Unexpectedly, he accidentally married Wei Wei Bai because of his playfulness. But the biggest failure of business was that he had actually given up on her just like that. Dongling could not bear to give up on Wei Wei Bai. There would not be a second one in the future. Hinanchi's eyes darkened. He suddenly raised his head and revealed his delicate chin. He said expressionlessly, "There's no one in this world who can be taken back just because you say so. I'm young and have a bright future. I like her to death. What can you give her?" Dongling pursed his thin lips and narrowed his eyes, which were full of ruthlessness. Hinanchi was not afraid at all. He carelessly rubbed the corner of his lips with his finger. A punch in exchange for a kiss, he felt that it was too worth it. "I know you, brother. At most, you like her a little. You feel that Wei Wei is good to you and won't abandon you when you're in danger. If you get her, you'll get more love." Dongling gritted his teeth. "Hinanchi, shut up." Hinanchi's beautiful eyes drooped down, filled with an unyielding feeling. "I don't understand. What right do you have to treat her like this? You feel that she's good and you're going back on your words and not letting her go. Is this what you call liking her? You're just a selfish bastard." Hinanchi said fiercely, "I won't let her be sad. I'll do my best to give her happiness. It doesn't matter if she doesn't love me or like me because I'll give her everything I have, including love. If I'm in dire straits and she abandons me, I'll be glad that I don't implicate her. Even if I'm crippled and she doesn't want me, I'll be happy. She doesn't have to take care of me and can get more happiness." These words were said fiercely and anxiously. They were filled with a wolf's nature. Hinanchi walked a few steps in front of Dongling and reached out to grab his collar. He laughed coldly. "Can you do it, brother? You can't. You're already in dire straits and you still want to use her to take care of you. What you want is a nanny and a servant. You'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like." Chapter 620. Having said that, Hinanchi gave him a hard push. Dongling hit the back of the wheelchair, and the cigarette in his hand fell to the ground. Hinanchi neatly adjusted his sleeves and said calmly, "Brother, if you really love her, I'll compete with you fairly. But you're just saying that she's easy to coax, easy to use, and too kind to take care of your feelings. Save it." When he said this, the corners of his mouth curled up, revealing a cold smile. "In the past, she was bullied because I wasn't around. Now, I'll kick anyone who bullies her in the head." Dongling coughed. Being pushed by him wasn't light. "Nanchi, I'll say it again. She's your sister-in-law." Hinanchi looked up. Bright tenderness and fierce dominance intertwined in his eyes. "Not to mention my sister-in-law, even if she's my ancestor, I'll take her back and worship her myself." Dongling was like a bird. Wei Wei Bai had suffered so much. He was not blind. He had been suppressing his anger for a long time. Dongling smiled, but the corners of his mouth moved reluctantly. "Are you determined to steal my woman? But you forgot that the person she likes is still me." Hinanchi's expression turned cold. Dongling said, "She's even willing to die for me. What right do you have to snatch her from me?" Hinanchi finally couldn't help but roll his eyes in disdain. "I love her so much that I'd rather die myself. You can even say such a bastard thing like asking her to die for you. You're so arrogant, aren't you?" Dongling repeated, "Anyway, she likes me." Hinanchi said, "You're in the past. Useless, half-paralyzed, bastard old man." He Dongling felt that he didn't die in the car accident, but he was going to die in the hands of his younger brother. He Nanchi turned to leave and said disdainfully, "I'm going to see if Wei Wei kicked off the blanket. It's a waste of time talking to you." He Dongling, "Fuck, you're not in the right to covet your sister-in-law, are you?" He Nanchi came to the ward and saw that Wei Wei Bai was still sleeping in the same position. It was just that his calf had kicked open a corner of the blanket, revealing his bright skin. He Nanchi's mood also fluctuated at the sight of her fair skin. He gently covered her with the blanket. Suddenly, he pursed his lips and couldn't suppress the grievance in his eyes. He didn't have the slightest bit of momentum from before. "Do you really like my brother?" "I like it that much." He Nanchi's eyes were a little wet. He glanced at her beautiful side profile. "Can't you like me a little more? I'm much better than my brother." After he finished speaking, he gently picked up her hand and placed it beside his face, looking at her eagerly. "If you like mature old men, I will be very mature in the future." Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 90. In the corridor, he Dongling lit another cigarette, but he didn't smoke. He just stared blankly. He thought back a lot. He found out that he was possessive of Wei Wei Bai, and that he liked her even more. It was indeed not as pure as Hinanchi. She even couldn't raise her head after being insulted by him just now. He Dongling started to suspect that maybe he was really too bad to her. Ding, he Slag's favorability is at 60. When Wei Wei Bai woke up, she found that Hinanchi's favorability was at 90. And he Slag's favorability was only at 60. Bai Wei Wei was deeply melancholy. She was too lazy to ask why the two men's favorability had risen overnight. "Tongzi, get ready. The system, I've already prepared. I've already bought 2 pairs of panties that show off your butt. We'll each have one." "Wei Wei Bai, you wastrel, do you even need to buy these things? But then again, let's go belly dance together." Chapter 621. 90 and 60. In addition, it was so difficult to get He Jerk's favorability. Wei Wei Bai felt that her side mission was going to fail. However, after 90, if there wasn't a major impact, the favorability wouldn't rise so quickly. Probably. Hinanchi's favorability kept rising randomly. Wei Wei Bai felt that she was about to lose hope. "You're awake." He Dongling's voice suddenly sounded. Wei Wei Bai looked up. Her hair was a little messy, and her eyes were a little confused. She saw He Jerk wearing a suit and combed his hair. He looked as imposing as sitting in a wheelchair as if he was sitting in a president's chair. Wei Wei Bai's mouth was about to fall. He Dongling was holding some folders in his hand. He flipped through them casually and signed with a fountain pen. "Go wash up and follow me." Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while before nodding. She looked at the time just now. It was already time for the nurse to work. After Wei Wei Bai finished washing up, she came out and saw the side dishes and minced meat porridge on the table. He Dongling lowered his head to work and pointed at the table with his fountain pen. "Finish your breakfast before you start working. I've already eaten." Wei Wei Bai didn't stand on ceremony. She sat at the table and ate breakfast seriously. Anyway, she even had the heart to belly dance. She was basically fearless. There were 2 targets to be conquered in this plane at the same time. Hinanchi was better, but He Dongling was a wily old fox. She couldn't trick him easily. As a result, Wei Wei Bai was also tired. So in front of He Dongling, sometimes she couldn't even smile. After breakfast, He Dongling said, "Push me out." Wei Wei Bai pushed him out. She found that there was a car waiting outside. He Dongling went to the company. The He family had collapsed, and the company was also very depressed. Although they were heavily in debt, they hadn't declared bankruptcy yet. The shell company was leased. The time was not up yet, so he did not take it back. He Dongling arrived at the company. More than 10 company members had already arrived. He Dongling explained calmly, "They are all old people who are still willing to stay and fight with me after the He family fell. Wei Wei Bai, you're very lucky. After all, this kind of thing had happened, and it was a life-threatening situation. There were still people who were willing to risk their lives to follow He Dongling. This was indeed not easy." He Dongling smiled. "Yes, I'm very lucky. It's also because I'm a decent person." "Wei Wei Bai, I don't know how to be a good person, but I'm pretty good at being a jerk." He Dongling entered the company and started the meeting. How to reorganize the company, how to repay the debts, how to make the right promises to get new loans. When He Dongling started to work, his face was serious. Although he was in a wheelchair, it did not affect his calm and elite temperament. A beast in human clothing, a cultured scum. It was indeed the best word to describe He Dongling. This kind of man who looked decent when he worked. It was indeed easy to flirt with women. Unfortunately, Wei Wei Bai was used to seeing this. In addition, she also did this in reality. So she was completely unaffected by this scene. After a day of work, Dongling suddenly pushed his wheelchair to the floor-to-ceiling glass window. The afterglow of the setting sun fell on him. He turned around, his eyes hazy. His voice was also calm and indifferent. Wei Wei Bai was curled up on the sofa. She was bored and playing games. She looked up absent-mindedly. Her eyes were almost blinded by the light on his body. Then she heard Dongling say, "Are you willing to love me again?" The system immediately said, "Love, love, love, rise, rise, rise." The first sentence was for Wei Bai to say love, and the second sentence was for Dongling to increase the favorability after saying I love you. Wei Bai felt that the system was a big fool. Chapter 622. Her heart was as calm as water, but there was a shocked expression on her face. Dongling's smile deepened and his voice became mellow. Wei Bai, I was wrong in the past. From now on, I will pick myself up and make the company work again. I did a lot of wrong things in the past, I won't do it again. So, can you forgive me and come back to my side again? Hinanchi made him feel a huge sense of crisis. So Wei Bai was also wanted by someone. He had to quickly tighten his grip and hold on to her. Wei Bai was holding her phone, her fingers were still distracted playing the game. But her eyes were filled with tears and her tone was still stubborn. I don't love you, Dongling. Dongling's eyes softened. I know, it's enough that I love you. System, shameless, isn't this stealing the male lead's lines? Wei Bai looked at the unmoving 60 favorability and despised Dongling in her heart. But she still acted. She stared blankly at her phone and then as if she had just reacted, she lightly glanced at Dongling. This glance contained all kinds of complicated emotions. In the end, she sighed, I'm tired, Dongling, it's too tiring to love back and forth, I just want to live well. These words were filled with endless sorrow. It made people feel sad and uncomfortable when they heard it. No matter how hard Dongling's heart was, in front of Wei Bai who could take a bullet for him, his heart softened. I will try my best to make you trust me, I only ask that you give me a chance. Ding, Slag's favorability is at 65. Originally, he just wanted to make her turn back. But he didn't know when, but Dongling felt that his oath of eternal love was about to become true. Living with a woman, he almost didn't dare to imagine it in the past. But now, looking at Wei Bai, he found that so many women couldn't even compare to half of her temperament. He thought it would be good to settle down. Wei Bai lowered her head and did not look at him. Her back was indescribably lonely. Let me think about it. I'm in a mess right now. Dongling didn't have time to say a lot of sweet nothings before they were stuck in his mouth. He was silent for a moment. All right, consider it carefully. At least she still had feelings for him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so hesitant. Wei Bai stared at her phone and complained to the system, what should I do? I'm not fast enough. I'm going to die this round. She looked at the host who had given up on herself and was already planning to belly dance. She didn't even want to conquer Scum He and only wanted to play the game. The system indicated that it should first twist its waist and learn how to dance, so that it wouldn't look bad when the time came. Wei Bai suddenly said, 65 favorable impression points. Maybe we can still struggle a little. Wei Bai, maybe I should open a big one. The system asked, big what? Is the host starting to get serious? Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 92. Wei Bai and the system trembled at the same time. Why did Hinanchi's favorability increase again? Wei Bai scrolled through Weibo and found that Hinanchi posted a picture on Weibo. The picture was of a soft and white woman's hand and a slender man's hand. Their fingers were intertwined. Wei Bai saw that it was her hand at a glance. There was a sentence attached to the picture. I'll accompany you for the rest of your life. What a rustic literary style. This pretentiousness made Wei Bai's teeth ache. A rustic love line moved her to the point of increasing her favorability by 2 points. Wei Bai said that in the past, she had to die to increase her favorability. Hinanchi was such a simple target to increase favorability. She was in despair. Oh. Chapter 623. Wei Bai opened the game again and started playing silently. The system was anxious. Didn't you want to open a big game to let Jerk increase his favorability? Wei Bai, what is favorability? Strategy is not as good as dancing. Let's dance together. 65 and 92. The former increased by so much because she had to put in so much effort. The latter, she did not do anything and just went all out. Wei Bai expressed that this mission could not be done. Whoever wanted to do it could do it. The system was also speechless. Then, it silently took out a pair of discount pants that it had bought and tried it. If the size was not right, it could be returned within 24 hours. In the following days, Dongling started to get busy. To get rid of the image of a useless old man. He quickly gathered all the remaining resources and started to snatch other people's resources by hook or by crook. Then, this time, he learned his lesson. He did not touch Sire Jiu. While working, he was rehabilitating and flirting with Wei Wei Bai from time to time. Dongling had never been so busy. And Wei Wei Bai, who was being flirted with, was also very busy. She was busy watching cartoons and playing games. Hinanchi did not flirt with her anymore. But even so, Hinanchi's favorability still grew to 95. And Jerk's favorability, she could flirt with him as she wished. 65, unmoved. If the two brothers' favorability could be evenly increased, everything would be fine. Dongling brought Wei Wei Bai to the company every day. After a long time, rumors of them getting back together came out. Hinanchi was very busy. He called Wei Wei Bai every day. But during this period, she did not like his Weibo. She rarely picked up his calls. Then, he heard the news that she wanted to get back together with his brother. Hinanchi pushed back a few jobs and ran straight to the company with a mask and a hood. Bai Weiwei was tired from playing the game, so she laid down and took a nap. Dongling finished reading the proposal and looked up to see her sleeping with her eyes closed. Her skin was as white as a cake. He looked at her quietly for a while. Then, he slowly pushed the wheelchair to the sofa and said softly, "Wei Wei, it's time to get off work." Wei Wei Bai did not respond. She had used too much mental and physical strength during this period of time, so she was indeed tired. Dongling propped up his chin with his hand and looked at her carefully. She was pretty. Delicate eyebrows, thick eyelashes, and skin. She was very pretty. If it wasn't for her family background, he might not have despised her so much in the first place. This was the first time he looked at her carefully. Dongling looked and looked, his heart unconsciously stirred. A man who was used to flirting, and playful. Basically, Hu Lijing. To him, it was more exciting than emotional. Maybe there was a period of time when they worked well together. Dongling thought that the little lover was not bad and could develop in the long term. But it had nothing to do with being moved. This was the first time Dongling felt his heart open up so clearly. He was attracted by her sleeping face. He couldn't help but lower his head and get closer and closer to her lips. There was no lust, nor was it a sensory stimulation. He just wanted to touch her. Ding, Slag's favorability is at 70. Dongling hesitated 2 centimeters away from her lips. Her breath blew over, making him nervous for a moment. He was nervous about a kiss that he was used to? Dongling couldn't help but laugh at himself. He was about to kiss her. The door suddenly opened. Dongling paused and looked up. He saw Hinanchi's gloomy eyes. To record this reading record. Chapter 624. Dongling, who had stopped moving, moved again. Without hesitation, he kissed her in front of Hinanchi. Hinanchi's heart was torn. Before he could feel the pain, his body had already rushed out. But he was at the door and couldn't stop Dongling's actions. Dongling's kiss landed on Wei Wei Bai's back of hand. Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes and looked at Dongling in confusion. She covered her mouth with her hand. Dongling didn't feel awkward. Instead, he looked up naturally. "You're awake, Wei Wei." Wei Wei Bai woke up when she heard the sound of her favorability increasing. Hinanchi had already rushed to the sofa and pushed Dongling back into the wheelchair. Then he stood in front of the sofa and blocked Wei Wei Bai behind him. He looked at the calm Dongling with red eyes. It was as if he was afraid that Dongling would come and snatch Wei Wei Bai away. Dongling smiled proudly. "Nanchi, aren't you busy recently? You have time to visit your brother?" Wei Wei Bai also stood up and called softly, "Nanchi." Hinanchi's back tensed up and he turned to look at her. His eyes were filled with unspeakable sadness. Wei Wei Bai's scalp tingled when he looked at her. His eyes were full of complaints. It was as if he was an abandoned stray cat or dog that came to wait for her. Hinanchi tried hard to blink and suppress the emotions in his eyes. Then he lowered his head and said, "I've been busy recently. I can't accompany you every day, so don't ignore me." This sentence was said to Wei Wei Bai. Such an obvious attitude was no different from a confession. Dongling frowned and saw Wei Wei Bai's puzzled and confused eyes. He knew. Wei Wei Bai began to doubt Hinanchi's feelings. The nervousness in his heart appeared again. After all, compared to himself, Hinanchi was indeed a better target. If he were a woman, he would also choose Hinanchi. She was young and ambitious. She was ruthless to the outside world, but she was like a little lamb to her family. Wasn't this the type of man that women liked the most? Dongling could not be like Hinanchi. He was used to being domineering. So a calculating look flashed through his eyes and he suddenly said, "Nanchi, it must be hard for you to start over. As expected, Wei Wei Bai looked over. He dangling struck while the iron was hot. If you fail this time, don't even think about stepping onto the stage for the rest of your life. Hinanchi frowned. He had a feeling that his brother had an ulterior motive for saying those words. But ever since he was young, he wasn't as smart as his brother. Many times, he would fall into his trap. What was he trying to do by saying all this? He dangling suddenly looked at Wei Wei Bai and suddenly revealed a pitiful look. So, if others find out that you like your sister-in-law, your path to stardom will be ruined? This sentence was like a nuclear bomb. It blew up the atmosphere at the scene. Hinanchi felt as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over him from head to toe. He didn't expect that the thoughts that he tried so hard to hide would be exposed by his brother like this. Wei Wei Bai frowned a little strangely at first. You like your sister-in-law? It was as if she couldn't react to who he was referring to when he called her sister-in-law. He dangling's smile became a little malicious. Yes, Wei Wei, don't you know? Nanshi told me that he likes you. He likes you so much that he would die for you. Hinanchi couldn't muster up any strength. He couldn't even refute. There was only one thought in his mind. She knew that he liked her. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment and finally turned to look at him. Nanshi, is what your brother said true? Hinanchi stiffened for a long time before staking everything on one throw. His eyes burst with an unimaginable light. Yes, I like you. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 96. // Chapter 625. Just because of a disagreement, his favorability towards her increased. How could he win her over properly? Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with an imperceptible hesitation. She wanted to drag Hinanchi down to lower his favorability towards her. Or should she do a belly dance? After Hinanchi finished his confession, he felt that he had used up all the strength in his body and the courage of a lifetime. His heart began to beat rapidly. His face was flushed red and he looked at Wei Wei Bai, almost unable to breathe. It was as if her answer would cost him his life. He dangling couldn't help but rub his fingers. He didn't say anything, but he looked at Wei Wei Bai nervously. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have been hit with the pause button. She looked at Hinanchi blankly. Then she lowered her head, as if she couldn't face him. Nanchi, Hinanchi reacted immediately. I'm not listening. Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes fluttered a few times. There was a trace of fear and hesitation in her eyes. Finally, her lips moved. Nanchi, Hinanchi immediately finished her words. You're the person I like. He would never allow her to say such heart-wrenching words like she was his sister-in-law. Wei Wei Bai sighed. Her tone was soft but firm. Nanchi, it's impossible between us. Hinanchi looked up. His eyes were full of panic. His lips trembled a few times. There was a sense of abandonment on his exquisite face. Misty water vapor covered his black eyes. It made him look like a stray dog that no one wanted. His voice was hoarse and choked. It was full of frailty. I don't believe you. It's fine if you don't like me. Anyway, I'll always be with you. After Hinanchi finished speaking, he suddenly reached out and grabbed her arm, trapping her in his arms. Then he raised her chin and kissed her without any hesitation. This kiss was bitter and determined. It didn't allow her to reject it. Wei Wei Bai trembled and widened her eyes. Hinanchi hugged her waist tightly, holding her in his arms. The tip of his tongue pried open her pearly white teeth, breaking into her lips and fiercely plundering her. Wei Wei Bai felt like she was going to suffocate to death. Even his nose was not working properly. He could not take in any oxygen at all. If he dangling hadn't interrupted, Hinanchi would have kissed her to death. He dangling picked up a large book beside him and slapped it hard on his back. Hinanchi's body trembled before he released Wei Wei Bai. His fair face was flushed red, and his lips were moist and glossy. His ferocious eyes were now tinged with shyness. I know you don't like me because I'm still young, but if there are no accidents, I still have at least 60 or 70 years to pursue you. Wei Wei Bai had a bad premonition. Hinanchi continued, so, Wei Wei, I'm not afraid of rejection. After all, I'm the man who will pursue you for a lifetime. Ding, Hinanchi's favorability has increased to 98. Wei Wei Bai began to doubt her life. She had rejected him. She had clearly rejected him. She had indeed rejected him. Why is her favorability still increasing? There was no separation in life and death. There was no heart-wrenching. Just like that, the favorability points rose to 98. Wei Wei Bai wondered if she could still properly pursue him. After Hinanchi let go of her, his courage finally ran out. Although he said it without any hesitation, he still felt his heart ache. He was afraid that Wei Wei Bai would say something that would make him feel uncomfortable again. He immediately said, I'm leaving first. Wei Wei, there's still a job that I can't cancel. // Chapter 626. Hinanchi felt that to support Wei Wei Bai in the future, he had to work harder. Wei Wei Bai looked haggard as she watched Hinanchi walk out of the door. Dongling snorted coldly. This confession is simply unreliable. What love? Young people don't have any sense of responsibility. They say they love, and they say they don't love. He wasn't done yet. Hinanchi ran back, panting. He stuck his head out of the door. He said to Wei Wei Bai, "Oh right, my brother is bad, mean and shameless. Don't believe anything he says." Dongling, Hinanchi dropped a bomb, and he's paralyzed. I don't think he can use his lower body, so don't marry him. Dongling's veins popped out. Hinanchi wasn't afraid of death. He added another layer of insurance. He has bad breath, foot odor, snores, doesn't bathe, and picks his nose. Dongling's face was as black as a pot. Hinanchi, you're asking for death, aren't you? Hinanchi pulled the mask over his face expressionlessly, then turned and ran. Anyway, as long as Wei Wei Bai hesitated and didn't marry his brother, Hinanchi was capable of doing anything. Dongling saw Hinanchi run out. If he wasn't crippled, he would have rushed up and beat the shit out of that bastard. He heaved a sigh of relief, afraid that he would really be angered to death. Then he looked at Wei Wei Bai and was stunned. She sat on the sofa, her eyes dim and her face pale. Dongling couldn't help but say, "Wei Wei." Bai Wei Wei looked up in hindsight and forced a smile. "It's nothing, I just didn't expect Nanchi to have such thoughts about me." Dongling was about to say a few words to attack Hinanchi. Wei Wei Bai said softly, "There are people who like a woman like me." Dongling's heart was stabbed. He frowned and said, "What are you saying? You're quite nice." If it was a lie to flirt in the past. Now, this sentence was the truth in Dongling's heart. So what if she had a family background, money, and ability to work? Wei Wei Bai could leave those women behind. Life and death, rich and poor. It wasn't bullshit. Wei Wei Bai had turned them into reality. How could there not be people like her? Bai Wei Wei laughed at herself. "My family is poor, I've been a hostess, I've been married, I have no education, I have no special skills, my work ability is average, I have self-awareness." Dongling's lips and tongue were a little dry. "These are all external appearances." Bai Wei Wei calmly said, "But people look at the outside. You were in such a hurry to tell me that Nanchi likes me. Isn't it because you want me to recognize my identity and not have any delusions of being with your brother?" Dongling wanted to refute. "I just wanted to let you know that his love is not reliable. Why are you so unconfident? You deserve a better person's love." Wei Wei Bai's eyes turned cold. "Do you think a woman like me, who was abandoned by you, deserves a better person's love?" This sentence made Dongling silent. Bai Wei Wei suddenly lowered her head. Her clean and beautiful face, her clear and incomparably cold eyes. She said softly, word by word, "Could it be that the better person is you?" Dongling's heart was hit hard and he lowered his head awkwardly. His fingers gripped the wheelchair armrest tightly. Dongling was good at flirting and had seen all kinds of situations. For a moment, he couldn't say anything. He decided to get back together with her. He liked her. That was the truth. But under Wei Wei Bai's cold and calm gaze, he couldn't say a single word. Chapter 627. He liked her, but how long could this last? Dongling had no confidence in himself. Wei Wei Bai saw his hesitation and couldn't help but laugh at herself. "I'm so stupid, what do I expect from you?" Dongling heard this and felt like he was hit by a wave, instantly waking him up. She had him in her heart and was waiting for him to turn back? Dongling's lips trembled. Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. "I'm going back, it's time for work today." After that, she turned around and left without hesitation. After walking out of the door, Wei Wei Bai stood there for a while. "System, what's wrong?" Wei Wei Bai, waiting for the favorability. Ding, Dongling's favorability is at 75. System, Wei Wei Bai smiled calmly and then walked forward. Dongling looked at the sunset in silence and only remembered to light up a cigarette after a long time. He thought a lot and realized that he did have a special and irreplaceable affection for Wei Wei Bai. He didn't know what would happen in the future, but at least for now, he really liked her. Hinanchi finished his work and was resting in the dressing room. He tiredly held his forehead with his hand. He didn't dare to make the call in the past few days. He was afraid that Wei Wei Bai would refuse to pick up his call. She knew what he was thinking. Initially, he wanted to wait until he was more mature and confident before confessing his feelings. If he confessed now, he wouldn't even have a 10% chance of winning. Hinanchi sighed and still made the call. But no one picked up. Hinanchi's hope turned into disappointment. When he automatically hung up, there was only despair left in his eyes. She didn't like him. Hinanchi's eyes were sore. He blinked, afraid that he would cry and look immature. He could only hold it in. He bit his lower lip and mustered up the courage to call again. But there was still no answer. Hinanchi was not the kind of person who would back down. He transferred the voice message. Weiwei, he hesitated for a moment before repeating himself. I really like you. It doesn't matter if you don't like me. I can wait. 1 year, 10 years, a lifetime? Even if she was married, he would still wait. Until the day of his death. Hinanchi hung up the phone. His heart was filled with passionate love, but it only turned into a few words. But this was his truest thought. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door of the dressing room. Hinanchi thought it was his assistant, so he immediately got up to open the door. The door opened. A white handkerchief was pressed against his face, and the smell of anesthesia filled his nose. Hinanchi did not have time to struggle and soon lost consciousness. Weiwei Bai, who had just come out of the shower, saw a call from Hinanchi on her phone. There was also a phone message. After she finished listening, she sighed and said, Tongzi, it's rare to meet such a pure and cute target. It's easy to get favorability. If it came with that side mission from he scum. It was as if he was here for a vacation. The system said, why don't you reply that you like it, and the favorability will be 100. Weiwei Bai said, you're not afraid of belly dancing. The system said helplessly, of course I am, it's too embarrassing. But I've already bought the pants, it's a pity not to dance. I still have a few days of life left. Bai Weiwei, in the end, what did you buy with my hard-earned life? Ah. Hinanchi was kidnapped for 3 hours. Weiwei Bai and the system only then realized. Chapter 628. Hinanchi was too easy to capture, so even the system was too lazy to monitor him. Instead, it focused on Hidongling. The male lead's life is in danger. The system frowned. Weiwei Bai, do those people want money or lives? The system opened its heavenly eye. They want money and lives. Hidongling is too anxious to get up, but he can't touch the boss-level cannon fodder, 9th Master's resources, so he can only steal from others. With this, he naturally had more enemies. And Hinanchi was Hidongling's younger brother. Hidongling was very vigilant, so people couldn't get close to him easily. Those who had a grudge against Hidongling could only kidnap Hinanchi. Weiwei Bai thought about it and was about to call Hidongling. The phone call came. She picked up the phone. Hidongling's voice was hoarse and gloomy. Weiwei, Nanchi has been kidnapped. Weiwei Bai immediately changed her expression and said anxiously, what's going on? Hidongling smiled bitterly. It's my fault. The people I offended joined forces to kidnap Nanchi. It'll probably be difficult to rescue him this time. Weiwei Bai also felt that it was troublesome. In this situation, she could only use her life points to buy some life-saving things from the system. Otherwise, Hinanchi would definitely be in trouble. Hidongling's breathing on the other end of the phone became heavy. Weiwei, they have a request. Weiwei Bai, how much? Hidongling hesitated. It's not money, it's a person's life. Weiwei Bai paused. Your life? Hidongling, no, they want me to assassinate 9th Master, then use 9th Master's death to exchange for Nanchi's life. Weiwei Bai was at a loss. What kind of deal was this? Hidongling probably knew that Weiwei Bai didn't understand this exchange method. He explained patiently, 9th Master has been covering the sky with one hand for too long. He's even more hated than me. Many people can't wait for him to die. However, no one had the ability to take his life. I was the first one who had brazenly gone against him and survived, so those people treated me as cannon fodder and asked me to kill him. Hidongling was very clear. This was a dead end. If he didn't assassinate her, Nancy would die. If he did, he would be the one to die. Nancy might not be able to be saved, and Master Joe might not be able to kill him either. Weiwei Bai, this kidnapping ransom is very creative. Hidongling continued, Nanchi has been a good child since he was a child. Other than his foul mouth, he has the best temperament in the family. I plan to accept this condition. Usually, they would quarrel and poach each other. At the critical moment, they were still brothers. Hidongling could be a jerk to everyone, but he couldn't be a jerk to this younger brother whom he had watched grow up. Weiwei Bai's mind kept turning. She followed her train of thought and said, Dongling, calm down. You can't save Nanchi like this. Hidongling said, this is the only way. I'm here to say goodbye to you today. Weiwei Bai's tone darkened. You don't have to go. I'll go. Hidongling thought that there was something wrong with his ears. What? Weiwei Bai didn't hesitate and emphasized, I'll go. Hidongling raised his voice. Weiwei Bai, don't joke like this. Weiwei Bai was silent for a while. When 9th Master let you go last time, I felt that he was interested in me. Of course, this meant that a father had feelings for his daughter. After all, she was acting according to Ninth Master's daughter's personality. It would be strange if Ninth Master didn't have any reaction. Chapter 629. But He Dongling didn't know that. When he heard that it was interesting, he thought of the way Jiu Yi looked at Wei Wei Bai last time. His heart immediately jumped. Don't ruin yourself, Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai's indifferent voice sounded, I've been a hostess in a bar before. I've seen all kinds of things. It's not unheard of to accompany an old man and then kill him. There are many hostesses outside who marry old men and then kill them to steal their property. He Dongling's voice trembled, I don't agree. I won't let you go. Wei Wei Bai calmly said, He Dongling, you must have fallen in love with me. In the past, you were so cruel to me that you wouldn't care even if I died. He Dongling's breathing became chaotic and his words also became chaotic. Now is not the time to talk about this. Wei Wei, don't get involved in this matter. Wei Wei Bai smiled, full of helplessness. Even if you force me into a corner, I don't want you to die. She didn't just save Nanqi's life. It was also He Dongling's life. He Dongling immediately thought it through. He listened to the phone in a daze. He didn't know why, but his eyes became wet. The He family fell. He had nothing. He didn't cry even when his legs were disabled. This woman didn't want him to die at all. It made him completely unable to suppress his pain and emotions. Ding, He Slag's favorability has increased to 80. Wei Wei Bai heard the sound of the favorability increasing and directly hung up the phone. Then she went to pick a dress. It was light blue with a collar that reached her shoulders. It was a little princess dress that reached below her knees. Then she tidied up her hair. She looked at the photo of Jiu Ye's daughter and put on makeup. The system gave her the information of Jiu Ye's daughter while nagging, actually, belly dancing is also fine. You don't have to attack He Slag's favorability. To attack the favorability, Wei Wei Bai really started a big game strategy. Assassinating Jiu Yi was simply a matter of minutes. Wei Wei Bai held the lipstick in her hand. I've developed an obsessive-compulsive disorder in so many worlds. If I don't complete the side mission, won't I break my undefeated record? The system said, you can even get obsessive-compulsive disorder from this? Wei Wei Bai, of course, more importantly, I saw the pants you bought. It's too ugly. I refuse to wear it. He would rather die trying to get the strategy. She would definitely not wear those leopard print pants that exposed her but in the back and had a chrysanthemum in the front. They could reflect light and had a colorful glitter effect. Wei Wei Bai looked at the information and realized that it was Ninth Master's birthday banquet tonight. All the influential people in the city were there. He Dongling also received an invitation, but because of He Nanqi's matter, he definitely didn't have time to go. Bai Wei Wei planned to go around and walk around in front of Jiu Yi. He Dongling's favorability was different from He Nanqi's. He Nanqi was the kind of person who would give back dozens of times more favorability if you gave him a good reaction. He Dongling, on the other hand, was the kind of person who needed others to do everything for him, so he would be stingy and willing to increase his favorability. The title of Scumman, He Dongling was indeed well deserved. He Dongling knew that things were not good when he was hung up on. Wei Wei Bai wanted to assassinate Ninth Master, but how could she do it? Even if it was him, he would only be sending himself to death. He only wanted to save Nanqi, so he had no choice but to try without hesitation despite knowing that it was impossible. But why did Wei Wei Bai want to go? She would just be sacrificing herself for nothing. Chapter 630. Idiot. He Dongling was anxious and suddenly stood up. Stand up? His leg suddenly got better. If it was normal times, He Dongling might be very happy. But now, he rushed out anxiously and called the driver to stop Wei Wei Bai. Along the way, he mobilized his men to stop Wei Wei Bai. The news said that Wei Wei Bai was going to attend Master Jiu's birthday party. That old man was interested in her. Not to mention the assassination, Wei Wei Bai's face was so popular with Master Jiu. That perverted old man wouldn't do anything to her, right? He Dongling rushed to the birthday party. It was held in Master Jiu's living room. He also had an invitation, so He Dongling felt that he should be able to stop Wei Wei Bai. When He Dongling got out of the car, he saw Wei Wei Bai had just walked in. He shouted anxiously, Wei Wei, come back. Wei Wei Bai stopped in her tracks and stood by the door. A lamp was on her head, and the light shone on her body, giving her a hazy and holy light. She smiled, and her eyes were filled with light. She was so beautiful. He Dongling only felt that his heart was beating uncontrollably and his chest hurt from the impact. His voice became hoarse. I like you, I like you. This sentence seemed to be impulsive. But at the same time, it was as if he had gone through a difficult test and should carefully make a confession. Ding, He Slag's favorability is at 85. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything. She looked at him deeply, then turned and walked in. He Dongling trembled and immediately followed. But He Dongling was stopped at the door. He took out the invitation, but it was useless. It was as if he was deliberately stopped. He Dongling thought about it and felt a chill all over his body. Jiu Yi, that rotten old man, had indeed taken a fancy to Wei Wei Bai. He remembered what she had said. Because she had been a hostess, she didn't care even if an old man coveted her? He Dongling stood outside the door. He couldn't help but take out a cigarette, but his fingers were shaking so much that he couldn't hold it. In the end, he cursed himself, bastard. If it weren't for him, Wei Wei Bai wouldn't have been forced to this point. Hinanchi's tears finally fell from his eyes. He wept silently as he struggled to light a cigarette and smoke. His back was like a stray dog, full of despair and haggard. He finished smoking a cigarette and finally raised his head. His eyes were full of gloomy madness and the determination to stake everything on a single throw. He Dongling returned to his car. He made a call and ordered half of his men to go and rescue his brother. The other party might kill the hostage, so he did not dare to act rashly. But He Dongling couldn't care less now. He knew that Wei Wei Bai wouldn't succeed. If he didn't save her now, Wei Wei Bai's corpse would be waiting for him at dawn. Just now, he had repeated hundreds of ways for her to die in his mind. It was a heart-wrenching pain. He Dongling took out his pistol and sat in the back seat of the car. He waited for the other half of his men to come over. All these years, he couldn't bear to take out his accumulation even if the He family collapsed. It was completely exposed. But He Dongling was surprisingly calm. He wanted to save Hinanchi. He also wanted to save Wei Wei Bai. However, the matter this time had forced him into a dead end. Perhaps no one could be saved. All three of them were going to die. He Dongling still made the decision to do his best, even if he had to die. It was better to die with the person he liked than to live like a dog. Wasn't this also a kind of happiness? Chapter 631. When Wei Wei Bai walked in, the banquet had already begun. She asked the system, "What did you buy?" The system replied, "Because you still lack 2 points of favorability from Hinanchi and 5 points of favorability from He Dongling. So I bought you a 10-minute IQ lowering drug. Within 10 minutes, that awesome cannon fodder Elder Jio's IQ will be as low as if he has no brain." Wei Wei Bai's mouth twitched. The system was afraid that she would say that it spent money recklessly, so it said earnestly, "Spend what you should. If you stab Elder Jio to death, He Dongling's favorability will immediately rise to over 100. Hinanchi didn't care. His favorability would rise on its own. There was no need for a strategy. Wei Wei Bai said calmly, "Since I've already bought it, forget it. I can even tolerate that weird pair of pants. What else in this world can't I tolerate?" The system was silent. It then took out 2 pairs of pants. Leopard print with rainbow sparkles, it looked pretty good. After Wei Wei Bai entered, someone led her to Elder Jio. Elder Jio was still the same person who wore a 3-kilogram gold chain, clearly showing that he was very rich. His hair was gray and his eyes were full of darkness. But when he saw Wei Wei Bai, he still had a flash and his eyes were wet. Wei Wei Bai was wearing a blue princess dress. She stood under the crystal chandelier like a little princess. She seemed a little nervous. The people at the banquet made her feel a little helpless, but her eyes were bright and cute. "Hello, Elder Jio," Wei Wei Bai said politely, but her head was slightly tilted and her mouth was smiling. Elder Jio looked at her blankly for 3 seconds. "You really look like her." Wei Wei Bai smiled. "Like who?" "Elder Jio, my daughter." Wei Wei Bai thought of the information about Elder Jio's daughter. When Elder Jio was young, he had a lover. Because he was in the underworld, he had to leave her. That white moonlight gave birth to his only daughter. Jiu Yi spent more than 10 years to stabilize his position, and at that time, Bai Yueguang also contacted him. She was dying of illness and hoped that he would come and take her daughter away. That was the first time he knew that he had a daughter. When he was fighting with someone, he had injured his manhood, so he couldn't have any children. This daughter was almost identical to Bai Yueguang. She was an extremely beautiful child. She had practically become 9th Master's flesh and blood. Later on, that daughter died because she took a bullet for 9th Master. End of story. Hence, when Sire 9 saw Wei Wei Bai, who resembled his daughter, his fatherly love surged up. The system reminded him, the IQ-lowering drug has started to be used. This thing might be more irritating to the user at the beginning, so be careful. Wei Wei Bai, I feel like there's a hidden meaning in the system's words. Don't tell me that this thing has some terrible consequences? Elder Jio stretched out his hand, and his gaze turned loving. All the things related to calmness in his mind began to disappear. He kept thinking about how his daughter looked like. That child wasn't raised by him, but by his wife who was separated from him. She was innocent and stubborn, but she liked him very much. He was clearly in the underworld, but she wasn't afraid. However, she tried her best to pull him back on the right track from the underworld. Originally, he had already started to soften and wanted to clear his name. However, her death made him completely lose all hope. He started to take revenge on others. Later on, when he didn't have anyone to take revenge on, he started to torture whoever he didn't like. Anyway, his daughter, his only child, was dead. Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here / Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. You can see it the next time you open the bookshelf. Chapter 632. The existence of this world was meaningless to him. As for Wei Wei Bai, although they did not look alike, her temperament and actions were very similar to his Nan Nan. Sire Jiu reached out his hand. Can I hold your hand? Wei Wei Bai was still hesitating whether to hold his hand, but his gaze was already a little dazed. Actually, today is not my birthday, but my daughter's birthday. Every year, I would hold a birthday party for her like this. She looked very good in a blue dress. Sire Jiu looked at Wei Wei Bai in a blue dress, and the pain in his heart surged. He looked at Wei Wei Bai, and the more he looked at her, the more he felt that his Nan Nan was like this. A grown-up Nan Nan. Wei Wei Bai hesitantly raised her finger, then slowly reached over and placed it on Sire Jiu's hand. Her eyes were filled with worry. Then I wish your daughter a happy birthday, don't be sad. Sire Jiu's expression became even more dazed. Too similar, can you call me daddy? Wei Wei Bai, his IQ has dropped too much. Even if a normal person saw someone who looked like their daughter, they would not call him daddy. But for the sake of the mission, she forced herself to call daddy. She also thought of Bai Changyan's appearance more than 10 times in her heart, and apologized to her father. When Sire Jiu heard this, the tears in his eyes fell. These were the tears of an old father, and had nothing to do with his terrifying status and power. He was just sad for his child. He said repeatedly, okay, you're very good. Do you have anything you want for your birthday? His IQ was getting lower and lower, and for a moment, he thought of Wei Wei Bai as his own daughter. Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment, then said tentatively, I want to save someone. Sire Jiu's gaze was kind. If you want to save the world, Daddy will become Superman to save it. Wei Wei Bai, his IQ was really too low. The effects of the medicine were awesome. Wei Wei Bai took the opportunity to say, I want to save Hinanchi, but he was kidnapped. Jiu Yi nodded, is it the guy you like? Daddy will go save him now, and then kidnap him for you as a present. Wei Wei Bai, Jiu Yi turned around and instructed his trusted aide to send out his most elite men to save Hinanchi. His confidant looked at him worriedly, but he still nodded. Sire Jiu turned to her and said, Darling, is there anything else you want for your birthday? Daddy is rich, lots and lots of money. I can buy anything you like. Wei Wei Bai, I don't want anything. Can I leave? Elder Jiu was stunned. His expression became aggrieved. An old man wrinkled his face. He was just like an abandoned Shar-Pei. The system was confused as well. Aren't you going to kill him? It was afraid that she wouldn't be able to kill Master Jiu, so it specially bought a drug to lower her IQ. It had used its privilege to buy this thing at an internal price. Ordinary systems did not have the authority to buy such a special effect cheat like this. Wei Wei Bai. Why would I want to kill him? Didn't someone save Hinanchi? If the goal is achieved, there's no need to kill. Your host isn't a homicidal maniac. As for telling He Dongling that she wanted to kill someone, it was just to see if the favorability level could go up to 90. In the end, it was still stuck at 85. The system said hesitantly, there's a problem with that IQ-lowering drug. Wei Wei Bai was worried. What's the problem? The system said, when I buy it, I can choose a hint. It will make people with low IQ want to fulfill the hint. // Oh. Eh. Chapter 633. Wei Wei Bai had a bad feeling. Then, she saw Sire 9 take out a gun and stuff it into Wei Wei Bai's hands. He looked up with a kind face. If you want to leave, can you kill me? Wei Wei Bai, alright, she knew what the system was hinting at. This shouldn't be called a low IQ drug. This was a brainwashing drug. Sire 9 looked at her tiredly and lovingly. After Nan Nan died, I blamed myself for many years. It's too tiring to live. Seeing you is like seeing my daughter back. So, dying in your hands is my wish. Wei Wei Bai, she felt like she was watching a melodramatic drama. These lousy lines, this low IQ plot. Was there really no problem? Wei Wei Bai tried to pull back her hand and advised kindly, "Your daughter definitely won't blame you. You should live well." The low IQ Sire Nine's tears fell. "You're really a kind child. Seeing you is like seeing my daughter." Wei Wei Bai finally pulled back her hand and stuffed the gun back into Sire Nine's hand. "Then I'll leave. Goodbye." He Nanchi should have someone to rescue him. He Dongling's favorability was only at 85. Wei Wei Bai could only think of other ways to increase He Dongling's favorability. As for Sire 9, she felt that there was nothing she could use. And if she was still here after 10 minutes, Sire 9, who had regained his IQ, would probably skin her and cook her. Sire 9 was reluctant to leave. "Stay a little longer. Accompany this lonely old man." "Wei Wei Bai, if you stay any longer, once the low IQ drug wears off, it will be the system's turn to be lonely. Because the host was killed by the cannon fodder boss." She turned to leave in a hurry. "No, I won't stay. Goodbye." Just as she finished speaking, there was a gunshot behind her. Bai Weiwei's footsteps stiffened, and she looked back. Master Jiu held the gun and fired a shot at his chest. And then, he died. Wei Wei Bai was dumbfounded. "What's wrong, Tongzi?" The system was speechless for a moment before saying, "It's like this. When you passed the gun to him, the muzzle was pointed at his chest and the safety was off. So when he was about to take the gun, he accidentally fired and killed himself." "Wei Wei Bai, what kind of magic is this? How can he accidentally kill himself like this?" She couldn't help but say, "This IQ-lowering drug is too low. Lord Jiu accidentally killed himself." The people who saw Lord Jiu commit suicide immediately screamed. As for Ninth Master's men, they also began to panic. A group of people rushed in front of Master Jiu, wanting to save him. Several people rushed over to grab Wei Wei Bai. Because Wei Wei Bai was the last person to speak to Ninth Master. With that, Elder Jiu committed suicide. So his suicide definitely had something to do with Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai immediately lifted her skirt and ran. She didn't take 2 steps. Dense gunshots came from the door. A group of people rushed in. They were as aggressive as an army. And the man in the lead had a sinister gaze and a cold expression. It was He Dongling, who looked a little crazy. He had suffered a lot in the outside world. Thinking that Wei Wei Bai might have been sullied by Ninth Master, that old man in his 60s or 70s, his heart ached crazily. Jiu Ye's people immediately pulled out their guns and madly fired at He Dongling. Wei Wei Bai was speechless as she looked at the scene of the gang fighting. She felt that she didn't transmigrate to a normal world in the modern world. She had transmigrated to a gangster film. Chapter 634. In this day and age, there were actually 2 groups of people fighting each other with guns and fighting for territory. The system immediately said, "Quickly turn around and leave. Don't get hit by the bullets." Wei Wei Bai nodded. She lowered her body and ran towards the door with an ugly expression. He Dongling anxiously looked for Wei Wei Bai among the flying bullets. He was most afraid that he wouldn't be able to make it in time and would see Wei Wei Bai lying under Sire 9. Wei Wei Bai ran very quickly and was not far away from He Dongling. He Dongling also looked up and saw her. Ecstasy flashed across his face. Wei Wei Bai rushed too quickly and stepped on the cake that was pushed over by the crowd. She pounced over. He Dongling just happened to meet her and reached out to hug her body that had rushed into his arms. However, Wei Wei Bai felt that something just happened to shoot into her back. Then, it rushed into her heart. Wei Wei Bai, the system immediately gave a sharp warning. The host's fatal part has been shot. Her life is in great danger. The minimum life guarantee is automatically activated. Ding, system, the body is on the verge of death. The minimum life guarantee will expire in 10 minutes. Please complete the mission and leave this world as soon as possible. If the heart was injured, she would definitely die. The minimum life guarantee was useless. Because of the minimum life guarantee, Wei Wei Bai didn't feel any pain. She just felt a little dizzy and her vision turned black. Even if there was no pain, she could also feel the suffocating premonition of death. She opened her mouth and there was the taste of blood in the depths of her throat. He Dongling hugged her and hurriedly evacuated without thinking. Most of the people in the underworld in the city were at this banquet. After today, more than half of the underworld forces would be lost. He Dongling only hoped that Wei Wei Bai wouldn't be dragged into this. After running out of the door, He Dongling anxiously stuffed Wei Wei Bai into the passenger seat of the car. Then, he hurriedly opened the door on the other side and sat in the driver's seat. "Wei Wei, I've already sent people to save Nanchi. Master 9 won't let us off, so let's go abroad tonight, okay?" He Dongling's car sped out. He looked at the road as he spoke. Halfway through his sentence, he saw that his fingers were covered in blood. He was not injured, so where did the blood come from? Dongling stared blankly at his blood-stained fingers. Finally, with trembling fear in his eyes, he looked at Wei Wei Bai. Her head lay limply on the seat. Her face was deathly pale, and her eyes were somewhat unfocused. A large amount of blood burst out from her chest. It was the bullet that had pierced through the heart, causing blood to gush out from the wound. It was a ghastly sight. Dongling couldn't help but tremble madly. His voice trembled. Wei Wei? Bai Wei Wei didn't say anything. Instead, she struggled to look at him. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly as she smiled. Dongling was heartbroken by this smile. He finally reacted. This bullet was aimed at him. At that time, she threw herself into his arms and blocked the bullet. He suddenly stepped on the accelerator and the car sped out. Hospital, they had to get to the hospital quickly. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said softly, I'm sleepy. Dongling said fearfully, don't sleep, we're almost at the hospital. Wei Wei Bai, I didn't expect to die like this. Stepping on a cake and dying was completely out of Wei Wei Bai's expectations. Dongling thought that she was saying that dying for him was something that she had never thought of. He had hurt her so deeply. Perhaps she was heartbroken, so she had no intention of forgiving him. / For the convenience of your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 635. But at the last moment, she used her own life to save him. Dongling felt like his entire body was being torn apart. This kind of pain made him want to roar out loud. He couldn't even speak and could only drive to the hospital. Don't sleep, I'll promise you anything. I'm trash and trash, don't you think it's not worth dying for me? Why would she die for a trash like him? She clearly had more right to live in this world than he did. Ding, he slag's affection is at 95. Side mission completed. Congratulations to the host for avoiding punishment. Wei Wei Bai gave a weak snort. The system was already counting down. There were only 5 minutes left. The system's tone became hurried. Wei Wei, don't sleep, the affection isn't full yet. If you leave this world now, without the protection of the male lead's 100 affection, your soul may be damaged during transmigration. She still had 150 days of life in the real world. So even if the mission failed, she wouldn't die. But the system was worried that Wei Wei Bai's soul wouldn't be able to handle the consequences of failing. Wei Wei Bai's mind was so heavy that she could immediately fall asleep. Luckily Dongling's babbling voice made her find a bit of her reason. She suddenly said, Nanchi, have you been saved? With Jiu Yi and Dongling's people, Nanchi's chances of being saved greatly increased. And the system didn't remind the male lead that his life was in danger, so Wei Wei Bai felt that he should have been saved. Dongling pursed his lips, I've been saved. He didn't have time to answer the phone, so he didn't know Nanchi's situation. But to appease Wei Wei Bai, he could immediately confirm anything he wasn't sure about. Wei Wei Bai weakly took out her cell phone and dialed Nanchi's number. She could only pray that Nanchi's affection would still casually increase. Otherwise, Wei Wei Bai felt that she would really fail the mission this time. The call quickly connected. Hello? Wei Wei? Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief and couldn't help but smile. Yes, Nanchi, I heard your message. Her voice was a little hoarse, but it was almost the same as usual. Who said I don't like you? How could I bear to let you wait for me for a lifetime? On the other end of the line, Nanchi, who had just been saved, was silent. The system was calmly counting down the seconds. 1 minute left, ding, the male lead's favorability is at 100. When Wei Wei Bai heard the notification that her favorability had increased, her smile deepened. Sure enough, the target of this plane was an angel. Her favorable impression of him still filled up so easily. Detected that the host is on the brink of death, forcibly leaving the plane world. Countdown of 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Escape successful. She closed her eyes quietly and dropped her hand. Her phone fell to the side. Nanchi's cheers suddenly came from the other side of the phone. Really? Wei Wei, you've accepted me? I'll be good to you, for a lifetime, no, for many lifetimes, I'll love you. God, today is my lucky day. This silly dog's cry of happiness was clear even without the loudspeaker. Dongling's car slowed down and finally stopped in front of the hospital. But he didn't dare to look at Wei Wei Bai. He didn't open the car door and enter the hospital. Instead, he sat in the driver's seat in a daze, his bloody fingers holding the steering wheel. On the steering wheel, blood stains were all over, as if something was broken in front of his eyes. Download the https://www.sashu.com/ Download the full article, https://www.sashu.com// Download the full article, https://www.sashu.com/ Download the full article, https://msashu.com. Chapter 636. He Dongling suddenly said in a hoarse voice, Wei Wei, do you know? I just found out today that I've fallen in love with someone. For the first time, he truly felt his heart throbbing. It was like a tidal wave or an earthquake, shattering his frozen heart. This strange feeling made it impossible for him to escape. A desperate silence spread in the car. He Dongling slowly stretched out his hand. If I were to propose to you now, would you be willing? If you're not willing, reject me. Wei Wei Bai maintained the same posture. She did not move. He Dongling continued, you're silent, which means you agree. If you really want to reject me, you can let go of my hand. He Dongling said and finally held her weak fingers. He leaned his head against the seat, tears flowing from his eyes. He said hoarsely, you agreed to remarry me, you can't go back on your words. Hinanchi's happy voice came from the phone. You know what? I bought the ring, I was thinking of wooing you for 8 to 10 years before I could use it. Oh right, I've been looking for a house recently. Don't live at home. If that useless old man is here, he'll make a move on you. But you don't have to worry about him in the future. I won't let him hurt you, I'll do my best to protect you. Wei Wei? What's wrong, am I scaring you because I'm too happy? I'm too complacent, aren't I? Say something to me. In the car, He Dongling held Wei Wei Bai's hand silently. Her hand gradually lost its warmth. Outside the car, the morning sun gradually entered the car. He Dongling knew. She would never be able to respond to Hinanchi. Just like how her fingers would never be able to hold his hand again. Host's mission is completed. You've gained 30 days of life points and an additional 10 days of life points. A total of 190 life points. Deducting the semi-paralysis medicine for 10 days, 2 pairs of open-crotch pants for 2.5 days, a total of 5 days, and the IQ-lowering medicine for 15 days. The minimum life subsistence allowance will be activated for 10 days. The system will limit one supper for 5 days. Congratulations, after deducting 55 days, you still have 135 days of life left. Wei Wei Bai had just woken up when she was hit by a series of system notifications. She clutched her chest. Perhaps it was because the plane had been shot. The dull pain was still there. She couldn't accept the fact that the life points she earned from the quest that she had risked her life to complete was not enough. He had already calmed down. In any case, with Yi Yuxuan around, he could just treat the mission reward as charity and feed it to the dogs. Wei Wei Bai struggled to get up. Sure enough, she was still in the hospital. She felt that her home was actually the hospital. Ever since the day of the heart attack, he hadn't been able to leave the hospital for more than a few days even after traveling through so many planes. Wei Wei Bai decided to look for Yi Yuxuan first. She didn't want to get some HP from him. After traveling through a few more planes, she was going to die. Wei Wei Bai said, Slagstem, where is Yi Yuxuan? The system finally dared to speak. I think he's sleeping next door. He had a few days of meetings with medical experts from all over the world. He wanted to find out why you're sleeping from time to time. He's too tired so he takes a nap. Wei Wei Bai was touched. If Yi Yuxuan didn't have some problems with his brain and his skill at picking up girls is so bad, I might have liked him long ago. The system said, then do you like him now? // Chapter 637. Wei Wei Bai fell into deep silence. Just when the system thought that she would not answer, Wei Wei Bai suddenly said softly and blankly, do I have the right to like others? After she finished speaking, her smile had a hint of bitterness. To survive, I do everything with the purpose of a strategy. The shadow of death hangs over my head. If I really like someone, that person is really unlucky. It was not that she did not want to like someone. It was not that she did not have any feelings for Yi Yuxuan. But Wei Wei Bai knew that it was useless for her to like anyone now. For someone who only had 100 days to live, romance was not the first priority. The system had seen many sides of Wei Wei Bai. Anger, wit, calmness, composure. It had never seen her so sad. It comforted her, you can do it. I believe that you will definitely get 100 years of life and live smoothly. Wei Wei Bai smiled helplessly, I hope so, but can you throw away those 2 pairs of pants? The system hesitated. Wei Wei Bai, if you don't throw them away, we are not friends anymore. Wei Wei Bai said that the side missions were completed. She would not let her see the 5 days of life again. The system said hesitantly, I think it looks pretty good. Wei Wei Bai. Friendship over, goodbye. Wei Wei Bai, who forced herself to be awake, got off the bed. She found that maybe it was because of the good care, her body was not that tired. She planned to go next door and flirt with Yi Yuxuan. She wanted to see if she could get some life. When she went next door, she found that it was also a ward. But this ward was wrapped up by someone. When she opened the door, she saw a tall figure with his back facing her. Half of his face was covered by messy short hair, and he was sleeping quietly without making a sound. Wei Bai hesitated for a moment. Thinking about how he had been in meetings for a few days because of her illness, he was indeed tired. She felt that it would be better to wait until he was well rested before attacking. Wei Bai lifted her feet and was about to walk out. Yi Yuxuan suddenly convulsed. He groaned in pain and curled up his body. Wei Bai was shocked and immediately walked over. Yi Yuxuan, what happened to you? She had just walked to his side when his hand grabbed her arm. Wei Bai was in so much pain that she sucked in a deep breath. Yi Yuxuan, let go of me. It hurts a lot. Yi Yuxuan suddenly opened her eyes when she heard her business. Wei Bai saw that his eyes were bloodshot and his handsome face was covered in cold sweat. He did not move. He looked at her without blinking. Just when Wei Bai thought he was going to say something, he suddenly closed his eyes and fainted again. And before he fainted, in the end, the dreams in his mind could no longer bear the intense, tsunami-like pain. And they began to collapse one by one. It was no longer a dream-like pain through a hazy wall. Instead, it was neat and tidy, and there was no obstruction. It was a heart-wrenching roar. The follow-up to superstar brother-in-law's socialite sister-in-law, He Dongling knocked on the door of the music room. There was motionless food at the door. He glanced at the food plate. His face was deathly pale as he said emotionlessly, "Today is the day of her burial. Come with me, Nanshi." There was no movement from inside the door. He Dongling was too lazy to coax him. Everyone was in pain. The difference was who could bear it better. "Nanshi, the last call Master 9 made before he died was to save you," He Dongling said calmly. At that time, the only person who could make Master 9 make this call was Wei Wei. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on Chapter 638. That filthy Master Jiu must have agreed to some terrible request from Wei Wei. That was why he was willing to agree to save Nanshi. He Dongling smiled bitterly. "I know you won't forgive me. If I hadn't been so hasty, we wouldn't have made so many enemies. You wouldn't have been kidnapped, and Wei Wei wouldn't have died. But Wei Wei saved our lives. Don't waste it, or else you won't have the face to face her when you die." He Dongling waited quietly for a while after he finished speaking. Nanshi still didn't react. He laughed at himself and turned to leave. He didn't take 2 steps before the door opened. Nanshi walked out. His hair was disheveled and his face was dirty. He was still wearing the same clothes as the day he was rescued. There was a sour smell all over his body, and his eyes were cloudy. He didn't know how long it had been since he slept. He didn't say anything and just squatted down. He picked up the rice that had been cold for a few hours, lowered his head, and started to eat. He Dongling stood there without moving his body. Nanshi ate very quickly. It didn't matter if his face was full of rice grains. His eyes were lifeless, and his face was extremely ugly. None of his fans could recognize him. After Nanshi finished eating, he went to take a shower. He washed very carefully. After showering, he wore a black suit. He shaved and tidied his hair. Soon, except for being a little thin and haggard, his face was a little paler. Nanshi regained his usual handsome appearance. Even the childishness on his face had disappeared, and there was a sense of desolation and maturity. He wanted to see Wei Wei. He couldn't go dirty. Nanshi was expressionless as he went to the cemetery with his brother. The 2 brothers were surprisingly similar. Their faces were pale, and their eyes were dim. Not many people came to the funeral. They were all from the company. Wei Bai's urn was buried in the coffin. When the lid of the coffin was slowly closed, the coffin was closed. Nanshi's body suddenly swayed and he almost fell down. Dongling reached out to pull him back, but Nanshi seemed to have suddenly exploded. He raised his fist and punched Dongling in the face. This punch was very heavy. He was filled with despair. Dongling's nose started to bleed. The people at the side rushed forward, wanting to stop him. Dongling said coldly, "Get lost. This is between us brothers." Nanshi rushed over again, raising his fists and smashing them on his body. Dongling did not resist and allowed him to beat him. Nanshi quickly beat the crap out of him. Nanshi suddenly screamed at the top of his lungs, "Fight back. Why aren't you fighting back, you bastard?" Dongling spat out a mouthful of blood and said expressionlessly, "It's fine if you beat me to death. I originally thought that there was no meaning in living, so I can chase after her if I die." Nanshi suddenly kicked him fiercely and kicked him out. Dongling fell on the side of the mound. Below him was the pit where the coffin was placed. His face was covered in blood as he looked at the urn in the middle of the unclosed coffin. His eyes were a little sore. Dongling stood up in a daze. Hinanchi rushed over again. He grabbed his collar fiercely and pushed him to the ground again. It's all your fault. If it wasn't for you, Wei Wei would not have begged Ninth Master. At that time, Dongling should not have told Wei Wei Bai about him being kidnapped. What's more, he shouldn't have said that killing Ninth Master would save him. Hinanchi squatted down and raised his fist. Dongling closed his eyes and did not dodge, letting him vent his anger. But that fist didn't fall. At https://www.sashu.com/ read the full article at https://www.sashu.com read the full article at https://msashu.com button below to record this reading record. Chapter 639. He opened his eyes and saw Hinanchi's face full of tears. He gritted his teeth and looked at him in despair. I'd rather die then, brother. Instead of letting Wei Wei Bai go to Jiu Yi just to save him. Hinanchi's voice was almost crying as he shouted, I'd rather die, I'd really rather die. You can't protect her no matter what. Dongling stared at him blankly. Hinanchi laughed coldly, looking extremely miserable. You married her but didn't protect her. You said you wanted to remarry, but you still couldn't protect her. Hinanchi said coldly, you're really a useless, blind old man. Dongling didn't say anything. His eyes were heavy, and there was an indescribable gloominess. He used some strength to stand up. Just as he steadied himself, he threw out a punch. Hinanchi wasn't prepared and was hit hard. Dongling didn't stop and continued to throw punches. She's your sister-in-law. You're a little bastard who covets your sister-in-law. I'm standing here and letting you hit me because you're my younger brother, not because I want you to continue coveting her. Hinanchi looked at him fiercely. There was madness in his eyes. It made people shudder just by looking at it. He chuckled and suddenly raised his leg to kick him. Dongling blocked his movement with both hands. Hinanchi didn't care and continued to kick. Covet? You're the one with bad intentions. You want to steal your younger brother's woman. Dongling laughed in anger. She's your woman? Hinanchi kicked him in the stomach. Dongling punched him in the face. The two of them were like beasts at the end of the road, fighting and beating each other. The two brothers couldn't wait to kill each other at the funeral, or let each other kill themselves so that they wouldn't have to face the fact that she was dead. Hinanchi would never forget it. That day, after he was rescued, when he heard her say that she liked him, he was overjoyed. But when his brother's voice came from the other side of the phone, his world had collapsed. He said, Wei Wei left? She left. It was a simple sentence. He had taken away the person he loved the most in his life. Hinanchi's face was covered in blood. Finally, he kicked Dongling to the ground. Dongling struggled to stand up again and again before finally collapsing onto the ground. Hinanchi didn't even look at him. He held his breath, walked to the side of the coffin, and stepped into the pit. Then, he stretched out his hands and hugged the urn in a daze. He didn't say anything and just maintained his hugging position. His eyes were dead silent. If he could, he would rather be buried here and die with her. Hinanchi found that he didn't even have the strength to cry. He could only breathe with difficulty. His whole world was filled with suffocating pain. Wei Wei, you saved me, but I'm living so hard. He finally said softly, feeling wronged. I'm so sad. Hinanchi held her for a few hours. That extremely sorrowful appearance made people feel chilled to the bone. In the end, he finally put the urn back and then struggled to climb up the pit. As the soil buried the coffin. This funeral was finally completed. Hinanchi completely matured after Wei Wei Bai's death. He was silent and wrote a lot of songs. They were all love songs about sweet love. On the stage, he was always the most dazzling star. Every song was the most classic of all the songs of that year. He had more and more fans, but outside of the stage, he became more and more closed off in private. // Chapter 640. He became a superstar. His songs eventually became popular overseas. Those international award winners who had rejected him also threw him an olive branch, hoping that he would attend the award ceremony. Hinanchi did not reject them. After he went, he won the important awards very smoothly. Just like that, 10 years passed by in a hectic manner. Hinanchi also became the most dazzling and brilliant star of this era. Everyone liked him and admired him. His fans were all over the world. His talent was obvious to the world. Hinanchi held a global concert tour. Stop by stop, he sang the song he wrote for Bai Weiwei. Sweet lyrics, beautiful and warm songs. But for some reason, it made people cry. After the concert, he called Dongling. Dongling had become the richest businessman all these years, but he had always been single. He Dongling received his call, but the two of them did not speak at the same time. All these years, the two brothers seemed to have done it on purpose. They almost did not have any contact. From the beginning, they fought when they met. Later on, it was almost to the point where they ignored each other. He Dongling finally could not stand the silent atmosphere. He said, "What's the matter?" All these years, his influence gradually expanded, and he also escorted He Nanchi's path to stardom. He Nanchi also took on a few commercials for his company in the later years. He never took on commercials. It directly pushed his company's popularity to the world. He Nanchi's eyes were indifferent, and his tone was unusually calm. "No, I just want to call you brother." He Dongling, He Nanchi said again, "Weiwei wants me to return to the stage and become the most dazzling star. Did I do it?" He Dongling heard the name Weiwei and his pupils shrank. Every time he thought of her for many years, that painful feeling still existed. He took a few deep breaths and said, "You did it, Nanchi, so don't force yourself to death." He Nanchi had never stopped working all these years. He was practically writing songs with his life. When he was quiet, he was like a walking corpse. When he was writing a song, he poured all his soul into it. He Dongling sometimes felt that after Weiwei Bai left, there was no need for him to worry. He Nanchi was just a songwriting and singing machine. His happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy were all gone with that woman. "That's good. I fulfilled Weiwei's wish." He Nanchi chuckled. "Brother, goodbye." He Dongling looked at the phone strangely. This call came out of nowhere. Was he just calling to ask him this question? He Dongling put down the phone tiredly. He looked into the room and saw a 2-meter-tall doryman lying on the bed. Although it had been well maintained. However, he could still tell that this doryman was quite old. He Dongling walked up to the blue fatty and opened the zipper on the back, revealing a ring box that had lost its luster. Back then, when he gave her the blue fatty, the ring was hidden in the blue fatty. She accepted it, so she agreed to get married again. What a despicable way of proposing. He Dongling laughed at himself. His dark eyes were filled with tears of reminiscence. Sure enough, his idea was right. After Weiwei Bai left, he would never meet a second her. He Dongling covered his eyes. "Falling in love with you is the worst deal I've ever made, but I am willing to do it." He Nanchi put down the phone. He took out the key from under the doormat. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.